welcome to Cinema Savvy. In anticipation for Spider-Man No Way Home, which is just a little over a month away now, we are going to take it upon ourselves to go back through all of the live-action Spider-Man films. And I do want to stress the live-action ones. I think already we've had a few people saying, are you going to talk about Into the Spider-Verse? We have multiple times. I think we have not only a review, I think we also did a watch-along on that. So that will occupy you for at least another year until we talk about it probably again before the new one comes out. But we are pre-recording this. I do want to say this. So when this goes up, hopefully, fingers crossed, the new trailer should have been released for No Way Home. And we wanted to do this because we don't know for definite, but there's, a big suggestion that that film will contain all three live-action Spider-Mans. And, fingers crossed for that. We want our Lord and Savior Tobey Maguire to return for that. And we wanted to go back through them. So, again, similar to Into the Spider-Verse, we do already have reviews on the Raimi trilogy. I think we stopped after that. We didn't want to stray into the Amazing Spider-Mans, but we're going to be this time in a few weeks' time. So hopefully we don't repeat ourselves so much from this, but I think we have enough time has passed, enough years has passed since those early reviews for us to sort of like go in with some fresh eyes on this one. And it's going to be fun because if you followed the channel for a long time, you know that me and you, George, this is probably one of our favorite superhero films, if not one of our favorite trilogies as well. I definitely think it's up there. So, but before we get into this and sort of just gush about Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire and everything like that, over to George with the socials.
Absolutely, guys. So comment below your thoughts, not just on the character of Spider-Man, but of course these films as well, given their reputation amongst pop culture and many other things. Obviously, it's been out almost 20 years now as well, so no need to worry about spoilers, no matter how odd that makes us feel. So do comment along. As Chris said, these are going to be coming weekly every Wednesday between now and December the 15th will be the final one, Amazing Spider-Man 2. And just a quick heads up for people at home, the reason we aren't going back to the Tom Holland films, not only do we have reviews on them from release dates, which is, I think Homecoming was around the time we dropped the Spider-Man trilogy reviews, we also did them earlier this year as part of the Infinity Saga retrospective, so we cannot justify going back to two new films twice each in 1 year. So we'll obviously share links on our social medias nearer the time. Of course, they're going at the bottom of the screen now. Twitter at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy. Best places to find us. And we have a link to TeePublic in that description below. But yeah, just kind of introducing this series as a whole. We've had a pretty insane year so far in regards to retrospectives. By the time this goes up, we'll have done Ghostbusters 1 and 2. Of course, Bond, the Infinity Saga. We're currently doing Peter Jackson. We've got some other stuff coming up. We've definitely done some, the start of the year of retro reviews. We covered loads of others. We did stuff like Beverly Hills Cop.
Karate Kid,
Rocky. And we've known this day's been coming where we want to revisit these films. I think the beauty is of saying, why are we releasing them again? I have gone back and listened to one of the three we did. I've took notes on it. I know what we spoke about, some of the things we're going to do. So we've tried to juggle this a little bit differently. This is going to be, I think, similar to the Marvel Infinity Saga retrospective discussions where we have a slightly different schedule, but a schedule that's the same nonetheless. But I guess the big takeaway is that they were audio back then. These are visuals. We have a lovely Spider-Man logo above us on the top left, which if you stick around for each of these iterations, who knows, maybe there'll be another Spider-Man pop-up, or maybe if all three come together, we might have to make one where all three come together. So it's a pretty wild and exciting time, I think, to be a Spider-Man fan. And going back to what Chris said, of course, about Spider-Verse, the second one is up next year. It would be a bit too much to have started that as early as it is now. But as we said, at the time of this video going up, the fan event has happened in LA. And we are hoping over here in England that there has been a trailer online. If that trailer has come online and we've got something to be excited about, this is going to look great. If it doesn't, we're still going to be excited for what comes out in a month because we're assuming some things could happen. We're not going to formally say anything's happening. But yeah, as you said, it's a clear suggestion that Maguire and Garfield are going to be in these films. And, going back to formula where it all began, and with that awful pun in mind, we're going to always jump into something we love doing on these retrospectives. We always talk about the first time we saw these childhood memories. Now, I think this trilogy, I will go to Chris first, but I think this is the first time I have to put an adult perspective on childhood memories as well as childhood memories, because this trilogy has evolved as an understatement.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was when you just mentioned there 20 years. I mean, next year it will be, won't it? That was a very sobering thought in my mind that 20 years. I'm going to have it with another film. I'm going to have it with another trilogy this December as well. Not just Spider-Man, so it's absolutely mad. But I'm ashamed to say, well, I don't think I physically could see this film at the time. That's the big thing. This is how much the landscape has changed in 20 years. So I think this along with another film, and I forgot what the other film is. It might have been The Bourne Identity. That my memory's a little hazy on it now. But this basically led the charge to get 12 A's, I think, in the UK. When this film came out, it was a 12. I wasn't that old, I don't think. I essentially couldn't get to see this at the cinema. Every kid wanted to see this film, and we couldn't, which was a horrible, horrible feeling, which helped push, obviously, towards 12A. So the first Spider-Man film that I saw at the cinema was Spider-Man 3. I didn't even see Spider-Man 2 at the cinema, and that absolutely guts me. If Tobey Maguire is in the new Spider-Man film, hopefully Odeon, View, Cineworld, if you're listening, if you can play the Sam Raimi films in cinema, I will quite happily go and watch those films on the big screen. But yeah, my first time watching this film was on DVD. I actually think it was probably one of the first DVDs that I own. The menu's kind of crappy, and it was like this in the early days of DVD. It was very sort of touch and go with the DVDs. A lot of DVDs didn't even have a menu; it would just be straight into the film. But yeah, I picked this up on a 2-disc DVD. I still have it to this day in a very, very nice red case. And I just watched it there, and I think I did the same for Spider-Man 2 as well. But Spider-Man as a character was always there pretty much since from day one, really. You had the great 90s TV series as well, with the incredible opening theme. You had some brilliant video games as well. Before this, there's the 2 Spider-Man games on PS1, which I played a lot growing up as a kid. And then around this time, and I don't want to jump ahead, this is a discussion for Spider-Man 2, certainly. The tie-in video games for this trilogy were all incredible. So, yeah, it was not just the films as well, but it was a whole well-rounded experience of video games and TV and like other media. Spider-Man was always my favorite Marvel character growing up as a kid. Batman and Spider-Man were like top tier for me, like level pegging. But yeah, it's such a shame that I never got to see this film on the big screen, and indeed Spider-Man 2. But how about you? What was your experience like?
I've got vivid memories of seeing this for the first time as a kid. So kind of going off what you said, I know I'm a little bit younger, but my oldest sister, she just turned 30, so she would have been 10 when this came out, something like that, and 10, 11. And I remember this funny time where I've got weird memories as a kid that the 12 certificate, I just remember the 12 logo and that you couldn't see those films.
Mm-hmm.
And if you remember back in the day of teletext,
yes, yeah.
I remember like you'd read news like football scores. I wasn't into football back then, but I know how big football scores things were on it. And I just remember 2 articles across my life reading it. One was about Spider-Man, and the other was about Revenge of the Sith, which maybe we'll discuss one day. Who knows? But we have done it previously on the channel too. And the 12A stuff, I remember. I don't think I watched the Spider-Man shows yet. The 90s one. I think this was my first ever experience of superheroes. Forget films. Forget TV. I think this was it. This was the first experience, and I never read a comic book in my life. And I remember getting taken to the cinema to watch it. And I think the 12A certificate came out a few months after the film did. Was it because I'm the youngest of the 3 of my sisters? Obviously, my parents took us. My dad's obviously a fan. Obviously, Spider-Man's a family character, and sensible things. I'm going to assume 12A was an inevitability. I'm sure there'll be older people that will remember the process of it being invented, maybe. But it sounds like something we knew would happen eventually, especially with the way cinema headed. Now every film is essentially 12A nowadays. But
it seems strange that it took us in the UK so long to get to that point, because I think wasn't Temple of Doom PG-13 in America? That was their equivalent of a 12A, wasn't it? Back in the 80s?
And it's still. Yeah, and exactly. And there were new ratings created. We have the rating X, which became 18 at some point. And I think The Exorcist helped push loads of this stuff. But the BBFC is a fantastic university essay, I guess you could say, because there are some bonkers decisions, especially this year, like Last Night in Soho being 18. Some really, really bizarre stuff. But this being a 12A, I know 100% the only scene why, and it was the one I remember, was when Goblin obviously cost blood. And that is the only reason I think this got the 12 certificate. And I think you get the impaling of it as well, don't you? But
yeah, it gets a bit grisly.
I just remember loving it. And I had the game. Now, we didn't have a PS2 at the time. I bought it earlier this year, and I was replaying it. But we used to play PC games. And my auntie bought us the Spider-Man 1 PC, but it was like It's clearly like an illegal like duplicate, because back then you'd get your codes, but because there was no online traction, the duplicate codes could be used for so many different computers. So with my auntie giving us the Spider-Man game, I just remember memories playing it on the PC as a kid. Never completed it, and yeah, this film's just long engraved in the head. You know, I joke with my friends from school that when we were in year 11, we had to write essays, and for some reason, Spider-Man was one of the 2 texts. And the scene in which I remember having to analyze was the Peter graduation day, and it was, you know, the English teacher nonsense, like look at the significance of wearing the ring when her husband's dead, and all that kind of nonsense. And I think it's scary to look back at this film now, knowing how big it was at the time, and to see, I guess, its rise in modern media. And I think there's a really good segue before we really get into the film as well to talk about, I want to say, the resurgence of these films.
Yes, absolutely.
Because obviously we reviewed these in 2017. And I'm realistic. We both had a blast. I don't think either of us had seen it in a while or a short while. And we're like, you know, we forgot how great these are. People have it for them online. People criticize these people online. And we're in this, I want to call it the golden age of the Maguire films, where me and you spoke about this a lot. We think there were 2 big incidents that pushed the Maguire hype. I think the PS4 Spider-Man game was massively inspired by it. And essentially Spider-Verse Spider-Man might as well have been Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man with the flashbacks. And I think since that end of 2018 period, this trilogy, I think away from the fans, the general public has sort of come back to it and realized that, hold on, these were great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, not to, I don't think the fan page is a thing anymore, sadly, but we've been a part of some meme pages, especially surrounding the Spider-Man films, and you're right, the landscape's so completely different now. Even when we did the review on these, I don't know what year it was that we did the audio
July
recordings.
2017, 4 years ago, which is scary as well.
Oh my God. But even since then, like, I remember, you know, when we went back to watch those films, we just went back to them. We hadn't seen them in a while. We enjoyed them then, and we still enjoy them now. But watching this today, you know, with the memes being what they are, it's almost on the level of the Star Wars prequels, I would say, this trilogy. It's nothing's ever going to reach that level of the Star Wars prequels, but I would say it's the next thing after that in terms of, you know, a film trilogy and every line being a meme, everyone loving it. So I was watching this film today with that in mind, as I did, you know, with the prequels when I last watched them, when we did the watch-alongs to them. The landscape's completely changed now, and you're right, the games have come back. And I think even that PS4 game, I know we've had the Miles Morales game now, we've got the sequel coming out in a few years' time. That felt so much like an updated Spider-Man 2 game on PS2 that a lot of people were going back to that game, and so, you know, it played on the nostalgia of that game and remembering swinging through the city and everything, even to the point where Raimi fans bullied the developers to get a Sam Raimi costume skin in the game, which, you know, I mean, that should have been in the game stop anyway, but
I remember that because, like a lot of people, I think it was when they announced the first batch of DLC costumes, and these are all free costumes. They didn't do the Raimi one.
Yeah.
And that's there was story DLC, and each DLC would contain new costumes, and the first one didn't have it. And they got so much abuse in Insomniac that they released it free. I want to say like Christmas week. Like, they did it eventually, but it was literally like, okay, we've heard you, we've done it. And I've recently replayed this game, actually, not ahead of these reviews. It's just naturally built there. I've platinumed and everything. I've done the entire game in the Raimi costume, and because it just looks sensational. And we'll get to the costume stuff later, but I think that game is significant into this character now. And of course, we spoke about Spider-Verse. That film is probably the only reason we're actually potentially getting the 3 actors on screen together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, Sony have been pushing for this for years, but there is a technical term for it, and I've forgotten. It's like brand synchronicity almost. So you've got, you know, Spider-Verse film comes out, then the next game that comes out is Miles Morales, because people are aware of him now from the film. They're going to be playing the game. They're aware of him. Maybe even the Marvel films might build to Miles Morales. I know that the threads are there where they could go in that direction if they wanted to. Through those 2 things, it leads us to No Way Home, where we're going to get a live-action Spider-Verse. So everything's connected together. You know, Venom being what he is with the spin-off films, they're putting Venom in the next Spider-Man game. So everything is kind of happening at the same time to keep it in the collective consciousness. I guess that's a branding thing with it. But yes, and even with that PS4 game, I believe there's a moment in the game where you're on a train and he tries to stop it in the way that he does from Spider-Man 2 and it doesn't work, and he says, oh, funny, that worked last time. So even in that game, there's loads of callbacks to the Raimi things. And as you mentioned, the intro to Peter Parker's character in Spider-Verse was incredible, really nostalgic. And I think if something hits 20 years, naturally it's going to have its fans, and there is going to be that nostalgia there. And I think that's definitely going to be one of the driving forces of No Way Home when it comes out. Not only are you going to have the current fans, I mean, if there were any fans of the Amazing Spider-Man films out there, I'm sure, you know, there were a few, they're going to be coming back, but that is going to be massive for our age group, especially, and parents of people of our age group that were around the time when we were growing up and experiencing this character for the first time.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that, because when you mentioned that prequel comparison, that's one thing I've thought about a lot, is that the prequel generation, which we are firmly a part of, and I don't think that's something you can pick. I think you're either, and this isn't what your favorite film is. I think the timing of you were born and what films are at the cinema. I think you essentially have the original trilogy generation, kind of the VHS, not generation, but they're like middle grounds. And then you've got the ones that, you know, would go to the cinema, see the prequels, and then you've got the third generation, which I fall under Clone Wars, because that's had the build up, Clone Wars and sequel trilogy. And I think Spider-Man, you're kind of, there's two generations of fans now. I think you've got the Raimi ones, and as I said, there are fans of Garfield. But to me, the fact that the Raimi generation is so similar to prequels, there's memes, it's parody, it's taking the piss out of itself. I think it's people deep down enjoying it. And I think although, you know, a lot of these fans that grew up with those films, some do like Colin, some don't. I still think that they have a connection to those. That I know so many people that like love the Holland films, but they're like, but we grew up with Maguire, and it's a really interesting conversation piece of people now. And you know, we're not going to take pot shots all the time on these films at Tom Holland, but I think as the years have gone by, this trilogy, these ones here, have aged so well. Now we're getting 4, 5, 6 comic films a year. These are really standing the test of time, which is something I know you messaged me about earlier when you watched it, and it's just hard to break. Where I think the monumental impact these films have had, and I think before we went live, we were talking about as well the box office. This film made about $820 million worldwide in 2002, which adjusted for inflation is well over $1 billion. I don't have the numbers.
Yeah, it's massive. Yeah.
It broke, I know for a fact it was the first ever film to get $100 million opening weekend in America. And if you adjusted the previous record holder, that was still under 100 mil. That wasn't even the year. It was the biggest ever opening. And it's just insane to look back at, because as a kid, it was just a new film. This was, you get introduced to this new character for the first time, but I would have been so curious to be at an age like I am now, where you haven't had many comic films bar Blade and X-Men 1. You've got Spider-Man coming to the cinema. And really, I think it was maybe even bigger than some people hoped.
Yeah, no, I mean, when this came out, I mean, I wasn't aware of this at the time. As you get older, you become aware of it. But this film was an absolute tour de force, and I would say has kind of made, or at least massively influenced, the comic book world that we see today in cinema. Yeah. I mean, maybe it would have led to that point anyway, but this really showed what you could do, taking, you know, going from those pages of a comic book and bringing it to life on screen. The mid-90s, you had some pretty poor, you know, the last part of the 80s into the 90s, you had some pretty poor superhero films. You had like Superman 4, Quest for Peace, which was absolutely derided. You had Batman and Robin as well, which everyone hated. And it was kind of in that flux for a while. I would say the first resurgence of comic book films was Blade, which I still haven't seen, actually. That got a rescreening a couple of weeks ago. Had every intention of going to see it, didn't make it to it, so maybe that could be a review for another time. Then you had X-Men in, I want to say 2000, wasn't it? That came out, I think, the first X-Men film.
Yeah. 2000 and then this.
Yeah, you know, I mean, that was impressive as well, you know, taking concept like that, making it relevant for adults as well, that opening scene. Like, you know, I think we did a whole retrospective, didn't we, inadvertently on a review, I think, for the X-Men films, but that definitely helped push it. But I think this film took it to the next level. I think in terms of the X-Men films, it was really 2 years later with X-Men 2, where it really got on the level, I would say, of a Spider-Man or a Spider-Man 2. But this did it, and the audiences took to it. You know, it captured the hearts and imagination of all of our age groups, certainly, and really propelled comic book films into what they could be. Now, I would say they probably took a dip again, you know, when we get in towards, I mean, we love Spider-Man 3. We'll be talking about that in a couple of weeks' time, but definitely a dip in quality from the previous two. You had X-Men 3 as well, which kind of dipped. But I genuinely believe without this film, you wouldn't have 3 to 4 Marvel films a year now, and them being what they are essentially. And even that being said, and I might be biased, this could be nostalgia, but watching this again, this is such a solid film, and it always will be. And I'm always worried going back to this film if it will hit a point where it becomes massively dated. Now, there are parts in the film where it does feel a bit dated. The Macy Gray parade scene, that's always going to be so early 2000s. You've got is it Chad Kroeger? Is that his name? The guy from Nickelback in the end credit song. There are definitely a lot of elements of the time, but this is just such a solid origin film, which perfectly encapsulates the character, and I would say has never been captured since. Into the Spider-Verse is great, but certainly in live action, this might sound totally biased, but the landscape's so different now with Spider-Man in the newer Spider-Man films, whether you're a fan of them or not, it's bringing him into this wider MCU world, and he is a part of a whole essentially, and it never feels intrinsically like his story. We'll probably, you talked about those in the reviews, but the villains are all tied to Tony Stark, and there's all these links and references to a lot of other things. This was back in the day where you would just go and see a Spider-Man film. You didn't have to see 20 films before it. It is what it is. It is an origin story. It's perfectly told, and it's so self-contained, and it's so refreshing going back to something like this. There's so much heart in it. The script writing that just nails the characters. The look of the characters and the feel of the characters is straight off the comic book page. And I think that helps as well that you've got Raimi, who is, a self-confessed Spider-Man fan and grew up with this and loved it. And I think that definitely his passion for the character and the world of Spider-Man is one of the major things that got him the job in the first place.
Yeah, and this is actually, I think, when you look at some of the creative team, what I found really amazing was this is the second film Kevin Feige ever got credited on. Now, you look at him today, Mr. Head of Marvel Studios, but X-Men was his first, and this was his second. And, obviously, we don't know what's going to be happening on December 17th and whatnot, but I think when you see, listen, it's going to be, obviously, he wasn't brought in as the Forces now. He's not the head producer, not story, he's not any of that. But I believe there was some origins that he was very much a comic book nerd type character that knew the story, the characters, and I think he's got an associate producer credit. And I think he might have been in Avi Arad. I could be wrong, but this was very much his big way in with X-Men. And you mentioned Sam Raimi, the genius behind this trilogy. I was having a think the other day. It's like, you look at these films. And when people talk about the Amazing Spider-Man, they never say, oh, it's the 2 Mark Webb films, do they? They say it's the Garfield films. Whereas this trilogy is known as either the Tobey Maguire films or the Sam Raimi films. And I think that is a credit and testament to how well these are directed, how significant the importance of the director is. Because, yes, we'll get into Spider-Man 3 that there are some overhead issues and whatnot, but this is very much the director's vision. And I'd add Homecoming in here. That's Marvel / Sony's vision. Amazing Spider-Man is completely Sony's vision. There's no creative freedom for the directors in either of those projects, if I'm going to be honest. Whereas this, you can tell Raimi. I think you're familiar. I know you've seen Evil Dead films. I haven't, but you can see a lot of Raimi's sort of iconography in this. Like, I don't want to throw on words like auteur because that's used a lot these days. And I would say he is. But when I guess you could say he's like a horror legend, and suddenly he's doing a Spider-Man film. And I think as the films go by, you do recognize a lot of the sort of horror elements that come into it. I think obviously that scene in Spider-Man 2 is going to have the biggest description for that. But even bits in this, like when there's like skeletons appearing as their faces, like a second, is very early 2000s. What can we do with the film reel? What can we like add in as like an overlay and stuff? But it's very horror-esque. Not that it's being a horror film, and certainly there are moments in this. I think when you get to the action, certainly the final battle, that is a director that knows what he's doing with these characters. And I think this trilogy is not just a testament to the characters and to the action, but to him. He was able to put this together. And I think it's beautiful. We're almost 15 years from it kind of unofficially finishing. And it still stands out over so many dozens of Marvel films that have come since.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it is just like the self-contained nature of it that I love. And as you mentioned with the director, just letting a director make the film he wants to make. Now, I'm not saying that the studio didn't step in with this. I'm sure it was like a perfect blend. Unfortunately, we see the studio kicking in a little bit too much with Spider-Man 3, which of course we'll get to and, everyone's talked about. But comparing to sort of what I'm, going through the Peter Jackson films at the moment, it's always interesting me to see a director, especially one that starts out in horror, how they actually end up getting the gig to like a huge, big blockbuster action film like this. And, he did do a superhero film before this point. So I guess he did have, it's a notch on his belt essentially in the same genre, which was the 1990 film Darkman, which I still haven't seen actually. There's a lot of Raimi films I haven't seen. Yeah, that's right. I think actually I've only seen the Evil Dead trilogy before these films. So maybe that could be another retrospective for another time. But you do see a lot of his sensibilities kicking in, the quirky, strange side characters. You get plenty of those in the Raimi trilogy. And yeah, definitely, there are more skeletons in this than I remembered. Obviously, I remember the one with the pumpkin bomb going off on the balcony, and it's the only time that pumpkin bomb's ever used. And you think something like that would be really, really useful to just throw at everyone. And then like all the stuff with Norman Osborn, freaking out, losing his mind, the camera angles, the extreme close-ups of losing his sanity, very much like Evil Dead 2 and Evil Dead 3. And there was another part as well. The bit with Green Goblin with like he inexplicably has like a woman's voice, like screaming voice, and he does like the quick whip round to the camera. I've never understood that. Did he have a modulator? Does Willem Dafoe just have a really great sort of like, Hammer horror lady's screaming voice? I don't know. It's ridiculous. And there are some bits like that, but that just adds to the fun of this film. And, that's all coming from Raimi. And I really hope that comes through as well in his next film, in the Doctor Strange film. I keep thinking he's directing No Way Home. And I think that's literally just because, we're hoping that Maguire comes back for it. I think there's a good chance, but, fingers crossed. But hopefully with Doctor Strange as well, and that being, sort of like listed as a horror film, like the first horror film in Marvel, or at least having horror elements. I'm not going to say it's going to be like a 15 or an 18 or something like that. Of course it won't be, but a director just putting his stamp on the film and these characters. And I think that Raimi absolutely did that as well. And it's interesting to see the directors they did have in mind for this as well. Because it did kind of, even from the back, this was passed from pillar to post from like the 80s, and like Toby Hooper was named, who was the director of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1 and 2, did a bunch of horror films. He was tied to it and wanted to go in a horror angle, making the character almost like this body horror kind of thing. I guess it's what Josh Trank would eventually end up trying to do with the Fantastic Four, which, clearly doesn't work for something like this. James Cameron was attached to it as well. And whilst not wanting to make it a horror film, wanted to make it very adult. I think there was like a sex scene on the Brooklyn Bridge with Gwen Stacy or something. I think the villains were going to be Electro was going to be the main villain, I think, and Sandman was going to be like a henchman, but they were going to change the names and some of the origin stories. Leonardo DiCaprio was touted to be Peter Parker, which I'm glad that didn't happen. We always say this, but it's amazing how you look at the history of some films and where it ultimately led to, but you can't imagine it being any other way. I think, and this could take us on to our conversation on Tobey Maguire now. Perfect casting. I know a lot of people might be critical on Tobey Maguire. He is Spider-Man to me. He will always be Spider-Man to me. And I think he is the perfect actor, because I don't know if he'd done a whole bunch of stuff before this point, but especially when they were like, go on, sorry.
He'd done a fair few, and this is like a really good segue. So people like laugh at that and think, he was a bit old to be Spider-Man. Well, children, in 2002, no superhero film was big enough to cast an 18-year-old as a 16-year-old. That is not happening back then. I want to say Tobey Maguire. I've never seen it. It's when Mark came with me. He'd been in the Cider House Lodge or something like Cider House Falls. Now, I remember seeing one when I was at college, which completely blew my mind. I believe it was it was like the Frozen Bridge or something, and he'd done a lot of stuff pre-2002. And I'm glad you mentioned Leo, because I think those two are meant to be quite good friends. Obviously, people may have seen The Great Gatsby.
That's right.
And apparently, when they were younger, those two were always against each other auditioning for stuff. So I think when it would have been that mid to late teens roles, those two. Oh, and Frodo's up there as well. They always talk about
Elijah Wood.
Elijah Wood. Elijah Wood is in that film with Tobey Maguire that I'm trying to think of. And it's amazing.
You say it was Frozen something? Did you say? I'm going to check
something about a river or a bridge. And it's one of those where, it had a famous director doing it with Ang Lee. It's going to really annoy me now. Anyway, while you're checking that, so I think when you take your head back to 02, this is a big project. You need to have, you've got a kind of big direction of Sam Raimi. He's maybe a household name at that point in time, but you need to have somebody to take on that role of Spider-Man that's been in films that isn't a rookie, because if the actual Spider-Man doesn't work, the film doesn't work. And it's as simple as that. And that's how it still is today. But, you know, when you're 12, 13 films into a franchise, you can take a risk on a 16-year-old and give him an 8-picture contract. But in 2002, you need to have an instant impact. You need to have an instant hit. You need to have somebody that everyone can identify as Spider-Man. And I mentioned Spider-Man a lot. You have to mention that, to me, the casting of Spider-Man, you've got 2 roles. You're playing Peter Parker for the duration of it. And the second point is you're then playing Spider-Man. You need to be able to perfectly encompass both sides of the character. And I'm going to say this on a whim, whether or not special effects helps with each, I don't care. Not only do I think he's the best Spider-Man anyway, Peter Parker, there is no better. And the second one's going to have probably the best conversation on that with the story they do with him. But in this film, there is so much drama going in. And like, we know that obviously if you trace it back to Stan Lee's origins of the character of Spider-Man, it's one of those films where he, you know, he was created as a superhero that has a very ordinary life. He's an everyday person. He has financial issues. He's not wealthy. He's not a billionaire that can conjure up a suit or equipment. He was always designed to be the superhero that is almost timeless, that is an everyday person. And I think that's where the attraction of the character has always been. I've just clocked the name of that film. It's called The Ice Storm.
Ice Storm,
if
yeah.
anyone's heard of that.
Yeah.
And it is one of them where I think taking on the role of Peter Parker in the origin film, I don't think you can get a Peter Parker. He looks like he does in the comics. He looks like the nerd at uni. He acts like the nerd. We get some of his science abilities in this film. But more importantly, he's able to juggle his home life, his relationship with his uncle and his auntie, his relationship with his best friend, with the girl he's in love with. He perfectly encompasses that in this film, let alone the trilogy.
Yeah, and this film's having to do so much as well. And, you know, we were talking a little bit about this film earlier. I forgot that it's pretty much 2 hours bang on the dot. And this film accomplishes so much with that runtime. It doesn't drag, it moves at a great pace. Not only do you have to, and it's a while since he gets in the suit as well. And I think a good sort of series of films to compare it to, and I think even Sam Raimi compared sort of the flow of his trilogy, is to the Christopher Reeve Superman films, in that it's about 40 minutes or so, I think, before he even gets in the costume. It builds Peter Parker up and his home life and what's going on in his situation. And that's integral, I think, to sort of connecting with the character, you know, just in terms of moviegoers and empathizing or connecting with a character, you need that time. And I think as, you know, as these films have gone on, they've kind of got away from that. And I know it's the argument of how many times do we really need to see the origin story? And I can see that argument, but I think that there is so much character stuff that you miss out if you just skip right to the action and get him to Spider-Man.
Yeah.
You'd have to know the story already, and you either know the story from these films, which is why it connects to so many people, or from the comic books. But when you're taking in like a new Spider-Man or whatever, I think you lose a lot from the character if you don't at least go into his backstory a little bit and the emotions that come with it. I mean, this film's got a massive supporting cast as well, and Peter Parker's always at the center of it, which I absolutely love. You've got, I mean, we're going to go into each of the sections anyway, but that great sort of like father-son dynamic with a villain. So that's a really interesting angle. And, you know, it puts them on an emotional level together in a way where it's not just random hit, you know, villain of the week. There is emotional stakes there to it. And the two characters in their everyday life really get on with each other. He's balancing friendships and his love life, and, you know, he's a teenager, raging hormones. He's got his home life with Uncle Ben and Aunt May, and it's so much. And you're all in, you know, you're following Peter Parker's character beautifully well. And just going back to the Leonardo DiCaprio thing really quickly, if you look at the films that he made sort of like around the 90s, what he'd done Romeo and Juliet with Baz Luhrmann, which I think was probably 96, and then like the year after that he'd done Titanic. Leonardo DiCaprio, thankfully, he's broken away from this now, and he's probably one of my favorite actors in the business, if not my favorite. But back then, he was always kind of typecast as the pretty boy. You know, the women were like fawning over him and everything. And you shouldn't have that with Peter Parker. He is meant to be that nerdy, wimpy kid that everyone wouldn't do a double take to, just kind of blends in. He's a nothing character, and then comes into his own when he becomes Spider-Man. And I don't think you would have had that with the Leonardo DiCaprio. Not to say he couldn't have acted it or acted it well. He's a fantastic actor, but that Leo back then, 90s Leo, I don't see taking on this role at all. So I think they absolutely made the right call with Tobey Maguire for this.
was Aviator near this? Like, I know. Oh no, Gangs of New York. You got to think, it's
Oh yeah, yeah.
it's one of those films where like there's similar ages, I guess, but I actually think Toby's probably a couple of years younger, but I think Leo is the headstrong. They're going for A-lister, and I'll give Sony credit for this. Each of the 3 Spider-Man they've cast have not been A-listers. Andrew Garfield was an up-and-coming actor. Maguire was not necessarily a house name, but again, up-and-coming actor, been in not films. And Tom Holland was okay. We can take a risk on this kid who's going to audition the best, who can do this stuff, and he did. He'd done a few films, did theatre, musicals. So I say they've always nailed it. And you mentioned we'll get into some of the casting stuff later on in the other characters, but you're going about some of the, he's got this relationship with the villain who is someone he respects, and I've been thinking about what sort of time age these films up so well. Is that nowadays with an origin film, it is solely the origin film. Okay, and I'd say this is because the Batman Begins, not in a bad way. This is okay. Let's take a 2-hour character piece. Let's develop this character, and then we'll bring in some iconic villains for the follow-up films. And that's very much how comic book films work today. And I've got absolutely no problem in the world of that. But when you think this film is juggling with the origin of Spider-Man and the Green Goblin in one sole film, whilst delivering drama between them, not for them being villains for the sake of being villains, and all that kind of stuff. It's quite amazing how it even comes together that they're able to delve into his character so much where everything's earned. By the time you get to that final shot, and you sent me the gif after you were watching it, and he with greater power comes great responsibility. But then it's the afterline about this is my gift, this is my curse. And that is just the character in a nutshell. That last scene, the last 2 minutes of the film, you can take whatever you want away. How did you get to that moment working? And it all happened through the drama on screen. And when you really boil this one down, there's not many action set pieces.
No,
not many sequences. Okay, you've got the wrestling match, you've got the parade, you've got, I guess, the fire and the finale. But when they're not doing any of that, they are developing everybody on screen, and that's your supporting cast, your minor characters, your supporting antagonists like your J. Jonah Jamesons, who we'll get into later and stuff. And I don't understand. I mean, I understand how it's been made, but looking at it on the 2021 lens, it's so well that they were able to do that in a film. And again, I'm not going to diss on the Batman Begins, but modern day origins are a hell of a lot longer now. And I understand why they need to be longer, but I can't believe how well the pacing of this film is. And I think you spoke to me about that earlier this morning.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This moved at such a fantastic pace. There isn't a wasted scene in this film. Everything is key to it, to the character of Peter Parker and Spider-Man. And yeah, when you get to that point, you've done something right where you really feel it, and you really feel that natural change in the character over the course of a relatively short runtime. I actually think back in the day, 2 hours was kind of the norm, wasn't it? So that just felt like normal film length. Now it feels really short. This is 2 hours has become the new hour and a half to me, 80 minutes, Maybe it's just because we're hot off the heels of watching Eternals, which was 2 hours 43. It was way up there.
Eternals, Bond and Dune has been like quite the set of new releases for October 2020. 21, sorry.
Yeah, it's like I could have gone longer on this. It's like, 2 hours. Like you could have got another 20 minutes in there, but it's so economic with its time. It's fantastic. Going back to like Tobey Maguire briefly as well, how much he put into this role as well, physically as well. Like he obviously weight training. I think he did yoga and athletics and climbing, and he really like strict diet. He really threw himself into the role for this. And I know that's kind of part and parcel now with every superhero film comes out, someone does a body transformation. But he really gave it his all with the character, and I think he gets a bad rap. I think the positives for Tobey Maguire outweigh the negatives, but there is a vocal minority that talk about him not being that great. But I think he's absolutely outstanding. And I was going to say, the suit as well. I want to talk about like the actual look of Spider-Man. Could be nostalgic to me, but it's by far my favorite suit. I think it's right off the page of the comic book, and I think each one has tried to go out of its way to make it distinctly different. Certainly the next incarnation, when we got to the Amazing Spider-Man films, and in that first film at least, with a want to go more gritty and dark and realistic, because that's where comic book films were going at the time. But the final shot again, talked about the ending, but that final swing away, the Spider-Man hype scene, I always call it. I love when a superhero film ends with hype for that superhero character. It still holds up to this day, and I don't know if I knew this already. I mean, if I already mentioned this in the audio review years ago, then I'm going to look very silly right now, but it has been a few years. I couldn't remember that it was John Dykstra that did that was head of the visual effects for this film. Obviously, Star Wars pioneer. He was the guy who came up with Photoshop, I think, wasn't it? Along with his mate in a garage. Incredible, all these effect shots. I think the budget went up from like 70 mil to 100 mil or something like that. And at the time, certainly the digital doubles and everything, they, I guess, did look real. Now there are some shots where the textures aren't there and it does look like very video gamey. The scene that always comes to my mind is where I think he's going after the guy who's just stolen the money, who kills Uncle Ben, and he's running down the alleyway and he's putting on the outfit and then he jumps onto the wall. That looks a little bit ropey now, but it's fine. I can forgive something like that, because this would have been really, really ballsy to do all this kind of stuff. We hadn't really seen superhero action like this in a film. If it had been done, it would have been done practically or with some kind of visual effects, not to this level, but with the acrobatic style that Spider-Man is as a character. I think they even said they got someone on board for like the filming and everything who was like a stunt guy and said, you can't do this in camera. Like it's physically impossible to do some of the stuff you want to do in camera with an actor. It's got to be digital. And, with filming as well, with Green Goblin, they probably could get around this nowadays, I'm sure, but all of Spider-Man stuff had to be filmed in front of a green screen, and Green Goblin stuff had to be filmed in front of a blue screen so that no one was keyed out. It is great, but even that, when we get to Spider-Man 2, completely different story. But for this one, as you mentioned, the action scenes feel very small scale. And I don't know if that's a limit of the time or if that's just what they wanted to do with the story, but it's not like you're watching a Spider-Man film going, oh, there's no action in this is crap, because you're so invested in the characters that the action, it almost kind of takes a back seat to me. It's almost like a passenger side seat. The action in the film's good and it works for the film and what they want to do, but it's not overly, ridiculous or like overly choreographed. When we get to, Spider-Man 2 and certainly 3, the action, definitely kicks up a notch. It's been a couple of years, CGI's advanced, and they probably have more of a bigger budget, I would imagine, than this first film, but even that, like the swing away stuff in this is the best stuff for Spider-Man, even still, even by 2021 standards for me. You never get a scene like this now with Spider-Man just swinging through the city with that score as well, which we'll talk about later. It's just incredible to watch. It's some of the best superhero stuff out there, I think.
I think one of the big things as well with this is, you mentioned the digital doubles. Him jumping on the wall stands out in a really funny way. But I think, again, that's the age thing from it, that it's 19 years ago now, and in 2002, okay, you've got Attack of the Clones, which Lucas has put a lot of money into doing as every Blu-ray passing and release went by. You've got Lord of the Rings, which is obviously a discussion for another time. But CGI is not there yet. I mean, is it the Two Towers? So you actually got Gollum, you can say. Mm-hmm. But you're still not fully there. And for this film, having a full character motion, swinging, fighting, doing all of that stuff, you can understand the budget. And you mentioned John Dykstra as well. I think he won the Oscar, not just for Star Wars, but I think Spider-Man 2, I think you bring up the action is a really good point, because there isn't mass action sequences for the CGI. Now, in this film, obviously, you've got the bridge stuff, but a lot of that's very practical. Whereas nowadays, they'll have Spider-Man swinging and jumping. And if Maguire is back for this film, the new one, it's going to look really weird if we see him as complete full CGI Spider-Man. I know they've done it once or twice before, but it would look very weird with the modern technology, I think. So that makes me like a bit of a hermit, but I think it's one of those where it was imperative to success, because if the swinging doesn't work, how are you doing a Spider-Man film? And you look at those last 30 seconds, the minute when he's swinging and everything, I always get surprised at Spider-Man 1, because that's how good it looks. And I think it's not just the CG, it's the shot motion of what they're doing with the cameras. Because it's, I mean, not to pot shot at the Holland films, but we didn't see him swinging in central New York. Okay, take Infinity War out of it. Homecoming, first one, he's like in the corner of his estate all the time. Second one, you get the last 30 seconds of him swinging with Zendaya. And it's kind of there, like, come on, man. Like, you've been doing this for 3 years now. You've saved the world. You could at least be in central New York. Mm-hmm. Now, is that them being scared of doing central New York? I don't know. I hope it doesn't sound ridiculous, but it's something that's so integral to the character and you miss it. And I'll give Amazing Spider-Man 2 credit. I remember the Spider-Man stuff and that looked great. The costumes and the changes they did worked really well. Yeah. But when you're going back to 2002, it's a new character. It's a new, it's a new film. If this film bombed, the last thing they're going to want is knowing they wasted CGI doing it. And by the time you get to the next film, they've already nailed how to do it, and they can improve on and do newer things. That's why they won the Oscar, mainly for Doc Ock's arms, I always say. Mm-hmm. But I think so much was age well, and that sort of inadvertently going to the action they had to do. You look at that final scene, it's just him having a showdown with the goblin in person at a destroyed place. And I mean, it's one of my favorite scenes, but that is a very brutal scene.
Oh,
And
yeah.
why is it brutal? It's brutal because it's done in camera, it's done real. It's not a CGI aeroplane getting torn apart, that they're having to fight on and going on a CGI beach. It's not a CGI electric power plant and CGI electric pulling
God.
somebody up. You know,
Yeah.
it's something that I think with the technology at the time they were very aware of, and it's small choices like that that is a reason why this film has aged well. And I actually saw this on 4K, rewatching this for the first time. Had the Blu-rays for over a year and not seen them because I was patiently waiting for this. But the Green Goblin suit, I mean, we'll get to Goblin in a minute, but the glider stuff looked better than I thought. There's some moments where it looks a bit, it's very 2002, but a lot of the Goblin CGI actually looked really good.
Mhm.
Now, whether that's because we've seen some bad CG in some big films recently, I don't know. But the Goblin stuff looked a lot better than people make out. And whether that's also down to the 4K remaster, because the armor looks bloody beautiful. It looked like proper metallic and not plastic like I thought it might. Some films do that on remasters where what looked like great costume at the time dates really badly. But again, this film hasn't, and that's a credit to, I guess, the whole costume design, right? Spider-Man as well. You kind of already said that the suit's never been better. I don't think they can ever better this
No.
iteration of Spider-Man suit. We've got him in the thumbnails, but I think when you get something so perfect on the first time, how do you reintroduce a character and you have to change it because you can't do it again? And it's one of those things where, again, Garfield, it's just, we'll get to them eventually and talk about Sony's issues, but it's all these problems that they had by rebooting so quickly a solid trilogy like this.
Mm-hmm.
I think when we get Spider-Man 3, there'll probably be a big conversation on Avi Arad, who we kind of always laugh and joke at as being one of the big instigators behind some of these issues.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's the thing that we even still see in comic book films nowadays. It's like when an original comes out and it nails it in pretty much every single way, and then you reboot it, it's your natural instinct is to do something completely balls to the wall different, which, I could commend. You want to do something new with it. You don't want to give us exactly the same thing again, but because the original nailed it so well in every level, on like a action and emotional level and everything, to purposely choose to distance yourself away from all of those core elements in order to make it something different, you lose the aspects of that character. And I'm sorry to bring the whole tone of this review down, but like Jared Leto's Joker, how do you follow up Heath Ledger's Joker? Well, we've got to make it completely visually different and everything. And then, we get Suicide Squad and it doesn't feel like the character. And I felt like we've had that in some respects with the Spider-Man films, not to that degree, granted, but especially going into Amazing Spider-Man 1, it felt like, right, we want to do everything that those previous films did, but we can't. We've got to do it, go about it in a different way. But when this one nailed it in, each and every aspect, it's difficult to get away from. And I think you mentioned it looking as good as it did. It's just because Raimi, started his career with a lot of practical effects. You go to a lot of those Evil Dead films. I know he did more films than the Evil Dead. That is my only point of reference. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, they're the only films that he's done, but very much in camera stuff, tricks of the trade kind of thing. And granted, this is a more effects heavy film than those films, but he definitely blended as much practical stuff as he can, even, and this is a jumping off point onto the Goblin as well. The original design for the Goblin, there are so many fascinating concept arts and iterations of what they were trying to do with the character of the Green Goblin. And one of the ones that they did kind of set themselves on for a long time was this huge, like, animatronic mask of the Green Goblin. And it looks a lot more like the comic version of the character, I will say that. And, you see in the behind the scenes, this thing blinking and the ears moving and its teeth, and it's fully animated. It looks absolutely incredible. But I don't know how well it would have worked on screen, and I guess we'll never know in the final thing. I think if I was going to draw one negative to this film, it is the design of the Green Goblin armor a little bit. But I get the reason why they felt they needed to update it, because as a concept, and I was thinking about this watching the film today, and you could probably break this down for every comic book character. You got a character like Batman and his enemy is like a clown. It's like, what? That's really strange. How do those two characters go together? You've got Spider-Man and a Green Goblin. I don't know how that comes about. And I guess there is a need in the film for the origin story and what, Norman Osborn does for a living, to update it. And they go with sort of like the modern military applications of this glider and this suit and this performance enhancer. But what about the mask? what does a Green Goblin mask have to do with the military and everything like that? Did he just make that himself because he wanted to? He refers to the Goblin as like this other personality, but I don't know. So that's the one bit that's a little bit ropey for me. And there are some moments where it is filmed very flat, and I'm looking at specifically at the carnival scene, the parade, and it's the I surrender scene, and he's like walking up to the police, and it does look really crap a little bit in some respects. I love it, and I'll always love it, but I don't know what it is. So if I was going to go with one negative thing, I think they nail the Spider-Man suit. I think it's just the Green Goblin thing. If you look at some of the concept art, I kind of wish they would have gone with a slightly different design, but I get the reason why they felt they needed to update it to make sense within the world that it's being set in ultimately, I think.
Do we think as well that with modern day you can do that with the villains, whereas I don't think you could back in? You know how I mean, this shouldn't be happening in this day and age, still, but the whole yellow X-Men versus black leather X-Men,
yeah,
and it's all like I can understand why in 2000 they couldn't have them running around in yellow leotards, but they could if they did it tomorrow, and they probably will. I've always seen Green Goblin that because and I think because it's the first introduction I ever had to the character, I think I've always been attached to the armor, and I'll say that I know a lot of people don't like it. I think some people call it like Power Rangers, and stuff like that. But
yeah,
the helmet I've always loved, and I've never known the origin of the helmet because I always just assumed that because he's got a wall of helmets, it was one of them, which is that great little mask scene when we get the stuff later on. But I always it's that introductory scene at Oscorp when you've got the guy on the glider. He's in the exoskeleton, just nothing up there, and I was like, it would have been weird if there was a goblin helmet. Like, what would have been the purpose of a goblin helmet for this thing? And I love the fact that no one knows, but we can say it is on the poster for the new film. We are going to get it back. And I think I've said to you straight before, like, we just need Marvel to do a Hasbro Legends Green Goblin helmet now, because it's actually quite an impractical mask. I'll give it this. I think it's very iconic. But when you see like Willem Dafoe's teeth in it, when he's like acting through it and stuff, I know that's intentional, but I think the whole, because obviously when I think of Goblin, I think of the Gwen Stacy like famous cover with her on the bridge. She's got the pumpkin bombs. It's like, how can they apply that in O2? And I think sort of I'm with you what you said. That's the best way they could have done it back then, making Oscorp more military orientated than science based. I think whereas obviously we get to see many Spider-Man films eventually, and then it's only science based and it backfires awfully. But Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin, one of the most iconic performances of any comic book film ever. One of the most, I mean, listen, Willem Dafoe's legend in his own right. I think he's one of the iconics that we're thrown around a lot, and I just said it. You get actors that come and go who are good at playing villains and whatnot, but then you just have an actor that has a presence. And any film I've ever seen Willem Dafoe in at any part of my life, he's had a presence in. And I don't know if it's something unique about his voice, his sort of facial structures, that incredible face. I know we've both spoken in the past saying he would have made a fantastic Joker back in the day.
Yes,
and
even still, I think.
Yeah, and he's a kind of actor that he devotes himself to films. He doesn't just do big films. He likes to work and do different things, likes to challenge himself. And, you know, it's been amazing. I've grown older and realized that the Green Goblin, one of my favorite villains as a kid, is actually a really well-respected actor who's had a tremendous career. And anytime he appears in something, there's just that buzz because it's Willem Dafoe. And I think a lot of people, again, this is that sort of like prequel generation we spoke about. I think that's in the know amongst our generation now, that when you spot him in films, it's always the Green Goblin. You get the smile meme that pops up more so than anything else he's been in.
Yeah, like anytime he smiles in anything, like he's in American Psycho as well. And he's probably the creepiest thing in that film. And that's a film about a psychopath that is Patrick Bateman. Like when he smiles or anything, I immediately just think of Green Goblin. When you hear that voice, I think of Green Goblin. When I watch Finding Nemo, I think of Green Goblin. Like it's on that level. And I was just looking at some of the actors they originally had in mind that were considered for the role. Nicolas Cage, which would have been absolutely bonkers, but we know he went on to one day play Ghost Rider, so he got in the Marvel films that way. Jason Isaacs, John Malkovich, who I think was in talks to play Vulture, wasn't he, eventually?
Yeah.
In the Spider-Man 4 that we'll never get. And Jim Carrey as well. Now, I could imagine him doing like, you know, he's got great facial structure shape, hasn't he? I could imagine him throwing himself into that. Probably a bit too comedic, especially around that kind of time as well. Although I think he was dabbling with some of the dramatic side of things then. That being said, I think he would have made it too comedic. And not to say that Willem Dafoe doesn't make it comedic, because he absolutely does. He is having the time of his life with this film.
Yeah.
and just like the physicality that it brings to it as well. A lot of the time as well, he insisted on wearing the outfit because he felt like the stuntmen wouldn't be able to convey the character's body language and everything. So he's up there on that, on the glider prop, he's jumping on railings and going like, and just like, he's having the time of his life with it. The best scenes in the film for me are like, without a doubt, the stuff where it's just him, split personality in a room, talking to himself, flitting between the two personalities. It's incredible. I can't imagine anyone else playing Norman Osborn, and I'm going to say that for pretty much every single character, supporting character, villain across all of these films. Maybe bar Venom once we come to Spider-Man 3, certainly. But he's just, I don't have enough positive things to say about it. And what I do think about this film as well is, and we get this with Spider-Man 2 and comparatively when you get to 3, that's definitely a drawback. The fact you've just got one villain, you've got the time, you develop the one villain, you nail that. And obviously they do that in Spider-Man 2 as well with Doc Ock, who you could argue is an even better villain, sympathetic villain, whatnot. We'll talk about that next week, but it really plays with its time well. Now, again, if I was going to do another criticism, and I honestly don't have many criticisms about this film, and this is me really reaching because it's not a problem to me when I watch the film at all. The villain plot, I don't really understand in this film. And I don't know if I mentioned this years ago when we did the audio review of it. It's like the join me and we can rule the galaxy as like father and son kind of thing. And there's never really much of a temptation for me there as to why Spider-Man would join him in any way. There's kind of like this, they kind of wax philosophical on the rooftop in that really awkward scene where he like slaps him on the shoulder and leans against the rooftop, which just looks really awkward with the costume. But he's saying, with our potential, we can rule the city or rule the world, or we can destroy it. And that felt really just like B-list villain plot. Yeah, it didn't feel earned. Like the father and son stuff, the connection between Norman and Peter, fantastic. Don't have a problem with that. I know that you've got to have a villain in there. The Green Goblin that we get in the film, it's a serviceable villain. Like he does exactly what he needs to. The personality's fun. But when you break it down to the writing, the motivation, I don't get what that motivation is there. What is the Goblin's goal? Once he's got rid of all the people at Oscorp Industries, what's next kind of thing, it kind of stops. And then what's the draw for Spider-Man? Why does he realistically think that Spider-Man would join him? And so that I would say is probably the biggest negative I have, but it doesn't take away from my enjoyment of the film, not at all. Like it works for the film, and I don't even think about it when I watch it, to be honest. But
the Green Goblin stuff, I was after this. He kind of succeeds, right? In his opening statement, he blows up the rival company in the general, and he massacres the entire Oscorp board.
Yeah, he does.
Even though they're going to sell the entire company, which took me years to figure out as a kid, because you don't understand that kind of logic. But
does no one suspect his involvement in the
this
death
is what I always,
because he's like the only person alive at the industry. So
yeah, and he just didn't happen to be that day. And like his son was on that same balcony, and did he aim it at the right time? I don't know, but it's one of those things where when you strip it down, I think, okay, what's his beef with Spider-Man, right? Because this is the Raimi trilogy. I think bar Goblin, every villain is personally collected to either, when I say personally collected, it is essentially created by either Spider-Man or Tobey Maguire. And not Tobey Maguire, Peter Parker, sorry. And I think with this one, this is the only villain we have that's just an outright villain, and it shows. And I think their beef is literally I'm not going to do the voice, but he's like, you really started to piss me off. Like I don't know why it ends like that, but he, it's the fight at the parade, and then it's you take pictures of Spider-Man. Where do I find him? Like, why do you want to find him? Like, what's the goal? And I know it's the insanity thing. I think I'm with you. If I'm going to really dig into it, that's one of the very, very few things I have. Just take anything out the way of the film. No, I think he works perfectly as a origin type villain. That he's not going to be the layered one that epitomizes the film. But what they do have with Goblin, it's the other side of him. It's the Norman Osborn stuff that is truly the great stuff. And there's a lot more drama to that character than you think. He's got a terrible relationship with his son. His son is nothing but a disappointment, which took me also years to figure out. That amazing scene where Harry's like, don't drop me off at the front, basically, in the Porsche. He's like, don't ever be ashamed of who you are. And obviously Peter is the son that he wishes he had. And when you get to the final act issues, when he recognizes the cut on the arm, that incredible,
that's one of my favorites.
The blood bit, and it's that moment he gets personal when Tobey Maguire says, he knows who I am. and it's just so well done, and it all builds up to the final showdown where he says, "I have a father. His name was not Peter Osborne, Ben Parker." Why am I keep saying the wrong people today? And it's built to that because I love his relationship with Peter. The way he's like, you want to get a job? He's like, no, I want to earn mine. It's like I respect that.
I respect that.
He's and I think there's enough drama with the character where you can get away with the silly goblin bits, and I think that's something that Willem Dafoe is amazing. He can do over the top and he can do drama, and it's about how to get the blend of each. And the newspaper scene is just, I think, the epitome of his performance of the film. The whole walking, the mirror, the music, the shot zooming in, that's just Sam Raimi absolutely loving working with Willem Dafoe. And of course, this is a character that would get 2 cameos in these
Yes.
2 other Maguire films via mirrors, and we know he's coming back in Homecoming. Not Homecoming, in No Way Home, and we can say that his laugh was in the trailer. The return of the pumpkin bomb is in the trailer, and now he's in the poster, mask included. So Norman Osborn, I think, the conversation is he a better villain than Doc Ock? No. But do I enjoy him more? Yes.
Yeah.
That's not a discredit to Doc Ock before people jump on that too.
No, I'd completely agree with that, to be honest. You mentioned the mirror scene. Well, I think it's the scene from this film. There's a great outtake where it's Willem Dafoe like looking in the mirror, and I think he finishes his lines or messes them up, and he goes like, and he's like pulling all these like crazy faces in the mirror. If anyone's seen, I think you probably find it on YouTube. I just love that scene. You mentioned Harry Osborn there as well. I mean, not only does this film do real justice to his character and like a great setup, like you believe in that friendship with him and Peter Parker, and there's all these little threads which we know grow into much, much bigger threads as the next 2 films go on. But I think the trilogy does an amazing job with Harry Osborn, maybe apart from the whole amnesia thing in the third one. But as we said, the third one's got a few problems. We'll talk about that when we get to it that week. But even by the end of 3, immensely emotional to me when I first watched that film, and I still think it is to this day. And it's because this trilogy does a great job and doesn't neglect that side of things. It's got so many things it's having to juggle all in one film, and as the trilogy goes on, but that aspect of Harry Osborn, again, I don't think that can be topped as well. And we've seen them try and do something in Amazing Spider-Man 2 where they have to cram like a whole history of a friendship into like a quick little 5-minute dialogue at the beginning of the film. And obviously the less said about the ending and what they do with Dane DeHaan's Green Goblin, the better at the end of that film. But yeah, just great setup for the character. And, I'm thinking about all the threads that come into it in 2, like with the death of his father and everything. And that's the very end of this film. But even before this point, tensions were always there between like the favored son and then, Peter Parker kind of, there and everything sort of being taken in more into the family and Harry being neglected. So it was always there from the start. And it's just great to see that build as the films go on. And it is a good friendship, and we see that sort of like continue on into the next ones as well, including the end of Spider-Man 3, where every single line towards the final act of that film is them being about best mates and best buddies, and we're back together fighting friend, all that stuff. I love it. Absolutely love it. And yeah, I love little bits as well, just in the dialogue, just really subtle moments as well, where they go on that field trip with the spiders, and Peter Parker mentions something about like a factoid about spiders, and Harry's like, "What makes you think like I give a shit about that?" And then he uses that as a chat up line for Mary Jane. It's just little moments like that I absolutely love. Just great character moments, and Franco as well. I think he absolutely nails it, and I think actually he was one of the many actors that was also auditioned for the part of Peter Parker. I think it's like the Cillian Murphy thing's probably a good example from Batman Begins, where it's like, we like this guy, we'll give him a role. But again, I could you imagine Franco as Spider-Man? Like, definitely not. Especially by the time he's high as shit when we get to Spider-Man 3. Like,
yeah, I think I've never seen Freaks and Geeks, but I know that was his big breakthrough, wasn't it? Like the late 90s, which was probably just before. Well, it was just before this, but it's interesting because the father-son stuff didn't dawn on me again for many years. You don't get that as a kid; you get their friends, but as you get older, you realize that, there's this sort of thing there where obviously the whole holding hands thing, where he clocks it. But the really big takeaway, which I'm sure I've had it before, but maybe it's not mind, his last conversation with his dad is the scene on the stairs, where he says, "I've been a terrible father to you, and from today I rectify that." And when you get to the moment of Harry discovering the body, and Norman is there, not Norman. What's the butler called?
God, what is the butler called? Oh,
Bernard.
Bernard,
like
yes,
that.
yeah, you're
Like
right.
he is there in this film, and I mean he does come back in Spider-Man 3, which is great. But with this one, what I love more than anything is that his anger at Spider-Man isn't the fact his dad's dead. It's the fact that it was the night his dad said to him, "From today we kind of restart," and that's what hit me more watching this at this age was that the whole development of Harry Osborn is so well earned from that scene that it's built up to that. And credit to Raimi for not making him the villain in Spider-Man 2. We'll get to what did happen obviously down the line, but it was an incredible subplot to then leave as a not teasing for the future, but you've set up a conflict there, and it's something that they deliver on, and it's really fascinating. I think Franco is he. I mean, I know he's not anything at the moment where he's had his settlements and stuff, so it's one of the tricky ones. I don't think we'll be seeing him in the new film, if I'm being honest. But
yeah.
His character arc in the trilogy is one of the more emotional ones, and you know, there's a lot of questions to be asked about. You know, they're friends, but they keep going for the same girl, and all that kind of stuff. But I think James Franco's is a stellar job, and once again, the first time we'll say this for many times in the next few weeks. I can't imagine another actor being able to do that, and it's about having the patience to develop a character between films. That nowadays, character pops up, he's in a small role. Okay, in the next one, you're going to be X, Y, and Z, and not that it's ever going to happen. It's the Holland films. Ned, some people think will be the Hobgoblin one day. Ain't ever happening. I know that's lost a lot of weight and looks great, but I don't think that was the kind of I'm losing weight because Marvel have made me do it for it to be a villain. I think that's probably a natural choice, but Ned ain't ever going to be Hobgoblin in this films. Maybe I'll be wrong in 10 years, who knows? But it's one of them where, I guess going back to Ned, it's a great point. You can't do it better, so we'll just do a new friendship. Make it a bit different. Make it be nerdy or whatnot. And I think Ned does that job fine because they know we're not going to have another Harry Osborn come into this school. Because if you introduce Harry Osborn, by default, you have to reintroduce Norman Osborn by default, which is obviously what the Amazing Spider-Man 1 didn't do, and then tried to do in the sequel, which is another reason it failed. So I think it's a lot trickier than people think being able to juggle an ensemble. And I think all of it comes down to this film. And we might as well talk about some of the supporting cast to go with this. We'll save the best till last.
Yeah, okay,
but we'll kickstart with two of the most integral characters, Aunt May and Uncle Ben, the legendary Rosemary Harris and Cliff Robertson. It's not going to get done better ever again. And do you know why? Because they keep recasting them younger and younger. And that's not me sounding ageist. That is a simple fact. We won't be able to do it better than Rosemary Harris because we've already had the aunt character where she is I don't want to say vulnerable old lady, but it's like the grandmother figure more so than an auntie figure, which is what the character essentially always has been. And there's just something about Rosemary Harris and Cliff Robertson where like they're a really cute old couple, and you can understand. It's so hard to talk about supporting characters this minor in this film, but they just have a presence. They have a calmness that you understand why Peter Parker has been raised the way he has, because he has a caring aunt and uncle. And that's such an integral thing for this film. And it shouldn't be integral, but in future films, they try and avoid it. They try and give people subplots. They try and make people more active so they can have a bigger presence because they're young. And it's a really weird scenario saying he's done with these two characters, but at the same time, it's I don't know. I don't know if I'm over talking about them, but they just have a presence in this film that certainly with Uncle Ben, if that scene doesn't work, this iteration of the character is not going to work.
No, that you're right. They're absolutely wonderful in this film, and you know, saying that with Amazing Spider-Man, I did like the casting of Martin Sheen as Uncle Ben. I think he's a tremendous actor. I think he did it well. I think Sally Field for the stuff that she was given, and that's the big carryover from the Amazing Spider-Man films is what these actors were given. I don't think on paper any of the actors were necessarily bad for the roles. It was just the material they got. But yeah, you ain't getting a better Uncle Ben and Aunt May out of these films. Absolutely, like they're just tremendous. Like they have real chemistry. They feel like a real couple. They're great role models to Peter Parker's character. They have some nice moments with her, and I love those just like life lessons that they're just giving him. And it's not just Uncle Ben. You know, a lot of people talk about, oh, here comes Uncle Ben with another life lesson he's going to bestow onto Peter Parker, but you know, Aunt May has her ones as well, and we see that develop through the films as well. And you're absolutely bang on about the whole like grandparents thing, because they are obviously a lot more aged up than they are in subsequent versions, especially the new one. Jesus Christ! But like when she's in that hospital bed, it is kind of funny. You know, those eyes, those horrible yellow
Yeah.
eyes, and it's again, that's the memes coming through, but it's like, oh no, she must be protected. Like, I don't want to see her like freaking out or like being attacked. She's Aunt May. She must be protected. And that moment with, Cliff Robinson's just fantastic as Uncle Ben in this film. And that moment where he's lying on the pavement, it sucks. Like, not in like he's bad or anything like that, but it makes me really feel bad, that
Yeah.
scene. Because they absolutely nail that relationship. And similar to like I guess it is like the flip side to Harry Osborn and Norman, where the last dialogue with them is that, they're going to try and patch things up and it ends in a positive way. Peter Parker's last moments ended in a really bad negative way where he snapped back at him and said, like, stop pretending to be my father, which it just guts me every single time I watch it. But that moment, yeah, that moment is earned. It's the best death scene and it's so impactful for the character. And, as the films have gone on, they're like, well, we don't want to keep doing the origin story again and again and again, as I mentioned at the beginning, which I get, but that moment's so powerful and it has to be earned. And relatively short amount of screen. How much screen time do you reckon it is? Like 35 minutes, 40 minutes by the time he's
Yeah, I
probably in
think
the suit 40 minutes, but obviously he doesn't have the suit at this point, so probably like half hour maybe.
I want to say the 40-minute mark. I think Uncle
Yeah.
Ben's only had 3 scenes in the film in its whole,
Mhm.
and you've been able to drop like and earn a relationship like that. And like I
Yeah.
I didn't cry or anything, but every time I watch that, that's like a sucker punch. And I think it's not just because like Uncle Ben's a doomed character as such, but it's the way they build up to that moment with Uncle Ben, that you've had Peter starting to get arrogant, get rude with them. He wants the car, he wants the girl, you get the wrestling match, and he lets him go. And it's earned the death scene of that. This is the immense regret that this character will now live with, the consequence of using his power with no responsibility. And it really hits home that message.
Mhm.
And obviously, when I think one of the scenes that always gets me is the scene after his death, after the fight, is when he comes home at night to Aunt May, and it's just an absolute mess to
No
try and watch
dialogue,
that.
just all
No
visuals.
dialogue,
Like, yeah.
camera at the back corner of the room, no close-ups, no nothing, just a long take reaction. And it's scenes like that that sell you on this being believable, that you feel that these are real characters that have had those scenarios. And
Mhm.
it's the drama side of it. And so this film, it's an origin, but this is more of an origin. This is a drama piece, and these 3 films is almost character pieces on the character of Peter Parker. And I just think it nails everything you want for that. I mean, we'll speak final thoughts in, but as far as an origin goes, there are very few better, if any, because this devotes so much time to developing all the characters. And these are just 2 supporting characters. I said one of them's got 3 scenes, one of the most iconic characters in all of Spider-Man. And I think with Cliff Robson's worth adding as well, they uplifted his audio and used it in Spider-Verse because they kind of said it was the perfect delivery and the voice that was ever needed, which is a really lovely touch. And
Mhm.
not to diss on Martin Sheen, but we've kind of laughed in the past the whole moral obligation duty conversation, and it's like you're too scared to say the line,
Yeah.
but you have to say the line. And I think nowadays the only Uncle Ben parallel is the Bruce Wayne parents, that every time they come back on now, like people just laugh because it's become a bit of a joke. But there has been
Mhm.
a lot more live action Martha Wayne deaths than there ever has been Uncle Ben's.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, we've had Gotham,
Oh Jesus.
Joker, Batman Begins,
Tim Burton, Batman Forever. There was a
Snyder.
different. Yeah.
Did they do it in Batman and Robin as well? Like,
There's bits at the Wayne home as a young Bruce Wayne, but I don't think there's any outright gunshot in that one. I don't remember.
you've had about 7 or 8 with
There's been a
those.
lot. There's been a hell of a lot.
And there's
Yeah.
probably
Will
more
we
we
get
haven't
another
seen.
one? Will we get another one next year? That's what I want to know.
I think so. I'd be shocked if there wasn't. But
Mhm.
I think with Uncle Ben, I think when he nailed it so well the first time, it's really hard to sort of recover from doing. And they've announced this Spider-Man animated series. Are they going to show Uncle Ben's death in that? They'll be pretty crude to put on an animated TV show for kids. No matter what they say, it's Marvel Studios is also an animated show for children. I don't think that's something we'll see on the show. But should we
Just the
speak about?
last thing I want to say about them as well is that in this will sort of like carry on into our conversation, Spider-Man 2. I love that they're not just a functional character. We know the point and purpose of Uncle Ben. We know what's got to happen to get the character of Peter Parker, Spider-Man, to where he is. But I like that the first scene that we get is it feels like a slice of life. They've got their own problems, Uncle Ben and Aunt May. They're struggling for money. He's been let go at work, struggling the changing environment of the world as well, with computers coming in as well, and he feels out of his depth. I think he says he's like in his late 60s, isn't he, at this point? So he feels like he's no good for anything. He's trying to be busy around the home, money worries, which we'll come into it with Aunt May in the second one. So I love even that. Just it ingratiates you, sorry, into that world and these characters, and they're not just there to fill a certain role. They're given chance to breathe essentially, and just feel like real lived-in characters within the world as well. Should we talk about the main female lead in this one then, Kirsten Dunst? Because again, I think that this is often a character, certainly across the trilogy, that's met with some criticism as well. Again, many actresses went up for the audition. I think even Elizabeth Banks, who obviously gets cast as Betty Brant, she auditioned for the role as well, among many other people. Kirsten Dunst gets the gig. I loved Kirsten Dunst growing up in the 90s because I was a big Small Soldiers fan. I don't know if you've ever seen that film. Great family film.
Yes, not for many years.
Yeah. Jumanji as well, of course, she was in that film. So I was always aware of like Kirsten Dunst in a lot of the family films I was watching growing up in the 90s. So I absolutely loved her as MJ. That kiss scene is easily one of the most iconic scenes in the film. Just a great moment. And she gets a lot to do as well. The whole acting thing, you've got the sort of like the abusive household going on next door. Tell you what, she does get around, but I think that is the character of MJ from the comic book. I think over the course of this film, she's dating Flash, dumps him within a very short amount of time. She's dating Harry, soon gets shot.
She has a ring. She gives Flash a ring. I was like, was it an engagement ring or was it a promise ring? That's what I always laugh at.
Oh damn! Like there's a whole history going on with Flash that we never knew about. I think actually he comes back, doesn't he? The actor who plays Flash Thompson.
He's in the funeral for Harry in Spider-Man 3, which is
there's like a whole
now Deathstroke.
Yeah,
which is insane. But maybe he could have come back one day. Maybe he'll fight himself.
Well, I mean, he'd wipe the floor with a new one, wouldn't he? I mean, it'd be a no contest. Like, who the hell is this new Flash guy that we've got in the new films? Anyway, but what was I saying about her? Yeah, and then she's with Peter, and then in the next film, she gets married to this other jerk, my son, the astronaut, that guy. I forgot what his name is. So she's like pillar to post, but I think that is the character of MJ. But I mean, she looks like the comic book character, the brilliant red hair. She does fall into that character of being the damsel in distress, which I don't have a problem with. It's traditional. That's what comic book films kind of are, and that's what she kind of does in the comic books as well. They've definitely tried to, change a role, make it more contemporary. We can't always keep having damsel in distresses in the current movie world because things have moved on. But I think she works in this a lot. Now, I think by the time you get to Spider-Man 3 and it's like, oh, we've got another villain plot where another villain's kidnapped her, that's where the damsel in distress thing does get a bit stale, and you're hearing Kirsten Dunst scream for like the upteenth time. That's where it kind of gets to that stage for me. But for this film, for like a standalone film, I have no problem with her. I think she's really great in the role.
I love her in this. When you watch her when you're younger, you're not aware of stuff like damsel in distress. You just think like Mary Jane Watts. It's the way he describes her in the whole film, like the opening scene, all that kind of stuff. And I really like Kirsten. And I think I forget how young she was when she filmed it. That by the time this review, so The Power of the Dogs were coming out in the next few weeks. She's in that film. I know she's with Jesse Plemons in real life. They're in the film together as well, which is great. She's going to get another Oscar nomination. I don't know if she's won one yet, but she's had a lot of acclaim. And I think so many people think, oh, she's not done anything since Spider. I was like, no, she's older. She's took on more roles. And I think she's coming back. Was she the first person cast? I think her and Jamie Foxx were the first two they'd announced to come back for the new film, which is amazing because I think you have a lot of actors that would not want to be involved with something from 15 years ago when they were younger, perhaps, and maybe they're going to give her a bit more character development. Who knows? But Mary Jane's the romantic interest for a whole trilogy, and I don't think you can hide from it. And even the Zendaya discussion, I think a lot of people they call it MJ by name, but they've never directly referred to her as Mary Jane, and I think that was very much them trying to do like a nod Easter egg when it wasn't really about that. And I know that Shailene Woodley was cast and her scenes never got made it to the final cut, which was absolutely bizarre with Amazing Spider-Man. And I think Kirsten was able to make this character as iconic as it was. And I think, again, leaning into what we know, one of the good things Amazing Spider-Man did do, which we'll give it praise for, was going for the Gwen Stacy instead, because you've you've had Peter and Mary Jane for 3 films. He has had other love interests in these things, and to the credit of the Holland era, they've not tried to shoehorn Mary Jane in. They put Zendaya in, and they just call it MJ. So I don't mind that. It's always been a bit different, and you got to think about damsel in distress type thing. How common was that for action films in the 2000s? That this wasn't an era where you're going to get those in-depth moments, those in-depth character things, and we do get Gwen Stacy, and we'll have to talk about that modeling shoot that she does in it as well. But it's one of those really, I think she's great, and I think she perfectly in this film. I think you nailed it. By the time you get to the 3rd film, you're a bit sick and fed up of the damsel in distress. They've had their breakups, they're together in that. This is a love interest, and she's for some reason with his best friend. And it's about building them up to the future. And you get that great scene at the end as well, where he has to turn her down, and it's a big scene, and it's earned over the runtime as well. So yeah, I love Kirsten. I'll defend her to the end of the earth. And you know what? I think she plays a great damsel in distress as well. I'm just going to say, I think you can say that. She's good at screaming, and I think she's believable in the situations, especially like when you get to the little children or Mary Jane. There's a great joke in there for someone to do one day, or like just save one of them. You just see this thing tumbling down. He saves both of them, but he goes for her first, and that decision, the split eye shot. That doesn't work if Mary Jane's not working in this film.
I do think it's bizarre, like obviously with Raimi being a massive Spider-Man fan, why they chose to go with the character of MJ and not Gwen. Because as far as I know, Gwen was always the first love interest in the comic books. I mean, there was probably other ones before, but the main love interest, obviously she dies in the way, which I actually think they did in a pretty decent way in Amazing Spider-Man 2. I think it could have been better, but that emotional beat. Yeah, exactly. But they did that moment, and we kind of get a moment like that in this film with the whole choice. I think that's probably their
as well.
Yeah, their reference to that. But I don't know if MJ in the comic books at the time in 2002 was a big major character. She'd been in the comic books for years at that point, so she was like a household name, and people might not have remembered Gwen Stacy if she was like back in the 80s or something. I'm not sure. I'm not sure why the decision was there. So
I think you're right. I think Mary Jane was always the household name, especially with the animated show as well. And I think with Gwen Stacy, because she was always known as being the one that died, to the first film of Green Goblin, not that they would have gone for the whole comic accuracy in 2002. I think if you'd have cast a Gwen Stacy in 2002 and had the Green Goblin and had the bridge scene, that'd have been like, okay, we probably can't do this, so should we get Mary Jane instead? That's how I've always seen it. That I think she's the most famous, what would you call it, like Spider-Man love interest? Is that a polite term?
Yeah, I think definitely Gwen, and I think Peter Parker himself gets around a lot, to be honest. I think he's been with Betty Brant in the
Black Cat as well.
Yeah, Black Cat. There's a whole bunch of women that he goes out with in the films, but it's just even more perplexing to me though that by the time, and this is a conversation with Spider-Man 3, they introduce Gwen Stacy, but she's nothing like the comic book character, and they don't really do anything with her that Gwen Stacy's famous for. Like what's the point in even introducing her? But as I say, that's a conversation for another time. Supporting characters then. I mean, we could be on this for like another 3 hours with like other characters in this thing, because I know we want to get to the character that we want to get to, but are we going to save it for like favorite scenes like Bonesaw and Bruce Campbell? Like,
we can talk some of them. Let's save the Daily Bugle people for the last part of this. And you mentioned Bonesaw McGraw. Macho Man Randy Savage.
Yeah.
One of the greatest one-scene performances I've ever seen in a film. Now, I was always doing the wrestling one on the channel, and I haven't watched wrestling for years because how bad Vince McMahon's made it. I did not know as a kid. I mean, I didn't watch WWF outright, but I didn't know until I was about 16 that Bonesaw McGraw was a real-life wrestler. I always thought it was an actor. And when I got into wrestling, it took me years to work out, hold on, that's Macho Man Randy Savage. I couldn't care less about what wrestling means and the whole like, oh, wrestling's fake and all that stuff. For the purpose of this film, it is essentially real. I mean, it's just something you don't need to get tied up in. What an iconic match! I mean, how do you even talk about the wrestling scene? You've got the Flying Dutchman, in in the most perfect comedy way. There's like my leg, I can't feel my leg, and like I had to like a double take. I was like, we know he's a big deal, Bonesaw, but like it feels like outright comedy, and the whole unveiling. I mean, we've not even spoke about the cameo. Who else is in that scene yet? But the build up to the wrestling scene, and you got to think as well the story purpose. He needs the money to get the car for MJ, but we know as the audience, this is what's going to have to lead to Uncle Ben's death. And I think it's a fantastic way of doing it. An intense wrestling match. I just love the scene, and it's one of the funniest scenes ever made. Now, I didn't do Halloween this year, but on my Etsy account, I bookmarked a human spider hoodie you can get.
Man.
And
Nice.
I really want it to wear on the opening day, but you look like you're gonna have to dress up, so I'm not gonna do it. But that whole scene is just incredible. I know it's a favorite scene, but Bonesaw is the reason why that scene works for me. Just the voice, the mannerisms, the microphone, the high pitch, the fans in the crowd, Bonesaw, oh my god. And on the old wrestling games as well, when I was younger, you used to be able to like create a wrestler and upload it online on the wrestling games. Every year, someone would upload Bonesaw McGaw, and it was amazing.
Oh, that's amazing. See, I used to grow up watching wrestling as well. I used to watch WWF, and I kind of dropped off it when it switched to WWE, and I just kind of lost interest in it. But every time I watch this scene, it takes me back to those glory days of wrestling for me. And, you know, watching the Royal Rumbles and the tables, ladders, and chair matches and all that good stuff. Cage match. Cage! That one guy in the audience.
Fan in the crowd. Yeah.
This is what I mean. It's just absolute. It's just a meme gold mine, these films. I absolutely love it. But I don't remember, hand on heart, seeing him as a wrestler growing up. You know, I remember Kane, Hurricane, the Hardy Brothers, the Dudley. That tells you
just
how old I am.
I
was going to say it's probably just shy of it, isn't it? But since then, you know, I've seen clips of him and that personality, and he is that personality in this film. He's exactly the same kind of character. It's brilliant. You mentioned the Flying Dutchman, and that's honestly a joke that I've never sort of came back to a lot, but watching it today is like, oh my god, I can't feel my legs just carried out on a stretcher.
It's like a South Park joke.
It is. And then you've got Octavia Spencer as well beforehand, and she's like signing him up in like a wonderful cameo beforehand, where she's just like, may God be with you, and then he goes straight into it. But the man, the myth, the legend, one of the most charismatic guys I've ever seen in the film, Bruce Campbell, who I'm so glad gets a cameo in each of these films. And fingers crossed, he's in Doctor Strange 2 somewhere as well. I like to think he's almost like Raimi's Lucky Charm now with these superhero films. He's brilliant in this. There's what's the name of the boxing commentator? You know, when they do the voice like "Let's get ready to rumble," that kind of thing. He's putting on that persona. He's in the showy jacket. He's in the shades. He's everything you want and more, and that's one of my favorite things across this whole trilogy is Bruce Campbell's character, especially when we get to 3. Like, my God, he absolutely knocks out of the park. But yeah, it's brilliant, and I actually think it's from the comic books. I don't know much about the origins of Spider-Man in the comic books, but I think there's definitely wrestling tied to it.
Wrestling match, yeah.
And it just shows like the tone that Raimi can flip-flop between, because you've got this scene, and you've got Bonesaw's like, it's like his 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, almost like those women that like his entourage that are like oiling him up and like massaging him and talking shit to like all the other wrestlers. You go from that scene, and then straight after that you go into the robbery, and then right after that you have one of the most touching scenes in the film with Uncle Ben's death. And you're thinking, like, 5 minutes ago I was watching Bonesaw is ready, and it's, you know, that's a nice outfit. Did your husband give it to you? You wouldn't get that in a 2021 film now, let me tell you that. But
yeah.
There's
a great meme from that, though, isn't it? There's that amazing meme in the last 3 years, and I think normal people say it was like, it's like Bones was like, Spider-Man, why would you say this? I'm a very progressive. It's like it's a parody of it, but it's really funny, and it's like, again, it's the power of the Raimi memes in pop culture.
Mm-hmm.
You get in things like that have aged so well that you can laugh at the fact it doesn't work today because it's kind of been addressed and you know it, and it's just. Mm-hmm. And it's now like Bully Maguire as well. If anyone's ever heard of the Bully Maguire concept, it's all that kind of stuff that adds to it. But I just bounce from it. Obviously, you mentioned the legend as well. What we know today could have been Mysterio as well.
Yeah,
which would have been one of the greatest. I think more of a nod, more so than a character. I don't think he was ever going to play a lead role? Did they always believe it was going to be like a montage in Spider-Man 4, wasn't it?
It's going to be the opening of 4, wasn't it? Or something. You see him getting carried out to like a cop car, and I think he's in like the fishbowl head, or he's carrying the fishbowl head in his arms or something. And even then, I don't know whether that would have been that you go back to the first 3 and say that was always the character of Mysterio. I think it was just we need someone to play Mysterio, and this is going to be the Bruce Campbell cameo in this film. That's the way that I always saw it. If you did infer that it was the character all the way through, then I guess there's a little bit of history there, but I don't see why. Is it Quentin Beck? Is that the name of his real life character? I don't see why he would take time out of his day to day to be a restaurant, a guy who ushers people into a restaurant, or even an usher when we get to Spider-Man 2, or a wrestling announcer. I just don't see that in his character, but I don't know. Should we talk? Let's talk about them. Go on, George. You tee us up nicely.
Daily Bugle.
Yeah.
At the age of 5, you don't think it's a real building. Well, sorry, you think it's the Daily Bugle, not a real building in New York. And I don't think at the time you realize how wonderful the character of J. Jonah Jameson is. And is it unfair to say, is it the character, is it the source material, or is it the legend that is playing him? Because there is a reason why Marvel / Disney / Lucas, whatever, could not recast J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. One of the most iconic performances of any character ever in a comic book film. He's back. He was in the Venom credit scene. He was in the Spider-Man credit scene. He's going to be in the new Spider-Man film. And it's just incredible. And the amazing thing is about this character, it's not just comic relief. He is a secondary antagonist. And I used to laugh at terms like that when I was younger. But then you realize what this film is doing. We laughed at how bad the Goblin subplot is. The whole, they're going to turn against you. And when they do, you're going to basically need it. There's only one man responsible for a whole city turning against Spider-Man. And that is J. Jonah Jameson. I don't know how you can give him the correct plaudits because the performance is unmatched. I couldn't give him the intro he deserves. I'm just going to say that now.
I mean, we always say, Hugh Jackman is Wolverine, Ryan Reynolds is Deadpool, say whatever you want to say about all these characters. J.K. Simmons is J. Jonah Jameson, like right off the comic book page, nailed it. There is no other actor who can do that, and they know it, and that's why we've never seen it, and that's why they've gone him back. For that, was it the final scene of Far From Home or the end credit scene? I can't remember which one it was.
Credits
scene, yeah.
Credit scene.
And hopefully we get a lot more of him in this new one coming out as well. He is tremendous. And I feel like every single time I watch these films, and I hope I'm going to get this with Spider-Man 2 and 3, because I've watched these films a lot. So, I'm always aware of a lot. But watching this one again, I was picking up on lines and quick little asides and jokes that I would have noticed before, but I've never really dwelt on them. And I was laughing again. I was like laughing afresh at some of the stuff, and the jokes you have heard a million times are still funny now. I can watch any one of those Daily Bugle scenes and still get a kick out of it than I did, if not more from when I watched it the first time. We'll probably cycle back to a bunch of like the J. Jonah Jameson lines, but even the rest of the Daily Bugle crew that you've got going on, you've got Ted Raimi as the character of Ted Hoffman, which is just brilliant. He's like the Weasley little snidey one who crops up, and then obviously you've got Elizabeth Banks as well as Betty Brant, who's amazing, and all of them just. In the world that we live in now with Marvel, where we're getting all these spin-off shows and everything, I would kill to see just like a Daily
The Office of them.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. The Office, but with them. That would be amazing. Every single time it cuts to the Daily Bugle, I'd love to see sort of like the cumulative runtime in each respective film of how long they're in the Bugle, because I genuinely don't think it's probably a lot of time. But I just savor every single second I get to spend in that environment. It's tremendous. It's so difficult to talk about. We love it too much. It feels overwhelming. We can't get across our appreciation for all of these actors and these characters.
Yeah, and I think it's because that's a really good question. How long do you get them? I'd say probably 5 to 10 minutes. And from the first encounter of the whole, I'm a photographer, it's just like, yes, I can see that camera's on his camera, and it's so funny that that's a thing. And by the time he gets the third film and they're flirting, and I think everything works because of J. Jonah, that because he is that insane boss, it's that kind of who's working under him. Not that this would have influenced The Office in a way, but I'd have been curious if it ever did, because they're all different characters. You've got like Robbie, He's the genuine, the nice one, the polite one. Actually, you've got Hoffman the Weasel, who's his brother, which makes it funnier with Raimi. And I just think you get this one scene in this, whereas J. Jonah, he's this scummy character, like talking about libel, all that. When the scene of the Goblin happens, like I always loved as a kid, the cigar getting thrown back up the window is just fantastic. His face expressions that come back in are amazing, but he protects Peter Parker. He doesn't give away who the photographer is. And it's like, it's a bit noble there. But the best thing about all of this, he doesn't care that essentially someone just bombed his office. The moment Spider-Man pops up, he's like, Spider-Man, you're working together. And it's like, it's so, he'd never break character. I think some films in that kind of character role, the asshole boss, they'd be like, okay, now he's desperate to get saved. He'll be like a scrawny comedy type clambering character. But J. Jonah was never about that life. He was blaming Spider-Man like to his face. Like, he went through with it, and you get the great line of him being webbed as well, which is just always funny. But I think they add so much to the film, and I don't think it's something you could appreciate in an early age, especially when you get the money stuff that comes into it. When it's like, oh, the wife's like, she can't get a rug, and it's like, whichever one's cheaper, and all that kind of stuff. And I think it's great comedic timing. And what I would love to know is A, is it improv? And B, how much footage was ever on the cutting room floor that's never seen the light of day? Because it feels like there's loads of scenes set there, but there isn't really that many aside from Spider-Man 3, I'd say.
Yeah, I was going to say, because we did this with James Bond. We had, did favorite one-liners and stuff. Do you have a favorite J. Jonah Jameson line from this film in particular?
Oh,
I know. I think I know what yours is.
I think I know what yours is. I'm
trying to think now.
You always talk about the Christmas meat ones to me.
The Christmas meat one's pretty good, yeah. It is just like
I always like crap, mega crap, because that's used online. But no, or it'll be the libel, whichever is like the blah blah blah. Is it something is spoken, and it's things like that. And he's not wrong, like he knows what he's doing. And I think you've seen every line of his is golden. He doesn't have a bad line in any of his films. And I think what makes it funnier is that from the moment he's hiring Peter, you've got these incredible shots that are obviously like photo studio shots of Spider-Man. And he's saying they're shit, but he knows they're fantastic. And he's going to use all of them. And what always made me laugh is that a lot of those photos are used in the marketing for the film. And if you have like sticker books and stuff, or like books or films with photos in, there was that one of the motorbikes in the air and that guy with the glasses at a low angle. That was used loads in marketing when I was younger. And I love the fact they're selling those shots in film, but I don't know, it's hard to pick a favorite. Certainly in this film, I think he's solid in this. I think Spider-Man 2, it goes to another level of what wasn't expected before.
I like the running thing of just how cheap he is. Like, Mr. Jameson, your wife is on the line. She says this or this. He's like, whichever's cheaper, and like puts the phone down. And again, when Peter's asking, he says like, I'd like a job, and he's like, freelance, best job for a kid your age or something. Yeah. He's so cheap. He doesn't want to pay anything. What does he say? Like, give him 10%. Make it 5%. It's just amazing. Absolutely incredible. And that whole dynamic with the Daily Bugle stuff, that's so intrinsic to the character of Spider-Man that they've just completely neglected in the future films. And it's all these core elements. And I know that you haven't seen the original Superman film, and it'd be interesting now because you've seen the newer take with Man of Steel. I don't know how you take to the older stuff, but certainly growing up with that, you've got all of the character elements. You've got Ma and Pa Kent at the beginning. It takes about 40 minutes, very similar to this with Aunt May and Uncle Ben, and all the, the drama that's going on in his personal life and his hormones, and he doesn't know who he is and he's questioning who he is. But then you have the Daily Planet stuff, and you do have all of these characters there. You've got the kind of the naive, plucky intern who's Jimmy Olsen. You've got the J. Jonah Jameson character who's Perry White, and then you've got Lois Lane who's there at the office, and obviously you've got Clark Kent's persona that he's having to mask as well. And it's such an intrinsic part of the character, and that's why I love these films, because they've been the only trilogy so far, the only set of Spider-Man films that we've seen that have actually done the Daily Bugle stuff. And I do think it's a genuine fear from all of these upcoming ones. I think it's especially following straight hot off the heels and not many years after Spider-Man 3 as well, which was huge. I think that was the highest grossing one of the three, wasn't it? Out of all the Spider-Man films. What, 4 years later? you know you ain't going to top all of that cast of characters in that Daily Bugle thing, so you don't even do it. You don't even acknowledge it. Only one email. And then in the newer films, he's like, I forgot the character that you always compare him to in modern day.
Oh,
He's like
Alex Jones.
That's it. Yeah, no, that's a perfect comparison for it. So at
Yeah.
least they've addressed it, but it's not the same. You've got like Betty Brant is like on in the school, isn't she? She's like on a sort of a newsroom for the school, like an update video, and I'm like, it's just not the same. You're losing so much from the character, I think.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to bring in the new one because obviously we wouldn't know about multiverses back when Far From Home came out. I love because I think in the Spider-Man PS4 game, J. Jonah Jameson is like a podcast. He runs a podcast, and it's like him being angry at Spider-Man and being crap with like people ringing in. I like Spider-Man. He like puts the phone down, that kind of stuff. They definitely nabbed that for the new films.
Mm-hmm.
What we spoke about a lot between me and you, if we know they're doing multiverse, if we know he's in the film, not necessarily bringing them together, but I would love more than anything to get to visit that iteration's J. Jonah Jameson, put the wig on him, do what you want. But if we could get different J. Jonas, it'd be really, I think it's a missed opportunity if you didn't. Whether it's important to have seen, I don't know or don't care. But Spider-Man 2 is going to have a discussion piece with a certain Doctor Strange being name dropped, which, as the years have gone by, could be something that is referenced. Who knows? That would be full circle more than anything that ever became full circle. But
we get an Eddie Brock one in this one, don't we? Which we know ultimately didn't lead to anything because it's Edward Brock Jr. that we get in the third one. But there are some name drops in there across the films. Superman gets name dropped again in this one, as we mentioned,
and
in Eternals. Yeah.
But it's one of those things where, in 2002, there's no, I call it like Easter egg hunting. There's no people freezing it frame by frame. Amazing Spider-Man did all that. Oh, what do we see in the background of this? We zoom in, we enhance, we do that. And it was just ridiculous. Whereas these films existed at a time where there was none of that. This was just introducing us to a new character, Spider-Man, and they deliver with that. And I think J. Jonah is a reason as to why they are successful, where you get the comedy from. And it's the real life stuff. This is the Peter Parker side of things, where he's trying to balance being Spider-Man and Peter Parker, and his boss being the man that hates Spider-Man, which is technically him. And I'm glad that they've never unveiled who it ever was. That would have been insane to have ever imagined. But it does make me think for the new one that because of how successful this trilogy is, they had to 180 the character. And I think an Alex Jones type does work in the modern era. That I think the online web is bigger now than newspapers were than 20 years ago. So it's interesting, and sort of what we criticized with the Amazing Spider-Man, they were so scared of doing it again. They made him an email attachment in the Amazing Spider-Man 2. Yeah. Because I remember at the time there was talk: are they going to recast, or are they going to get JK back? And he's always said he'd be willing to do it again. It's a role he always loved, and I think Far From Home was a lovely little nod. And then who knows what the future is going to have in store for him.
Absolutely. I think we should move on to the music, because I think that's definitely a talking point that we need to have with this one as well. I mean, Danny Elfman is 2 for 2 on the superhero soundtracks. Well, actually, I know he did the music to the Ang Lee 2003 Hulk movie, but we don't really talk about that film, do we? But certainly Batman 89, and how do you follow that up in the superhero world? I mean, he does an absolutely incredible soundtrack to Spider-Man. I will say, though, I mean, he was the one that came up with the themes, and the themes are just amazing. Every time you get that, I don't know what the theme's called. I think it's part of like the farewell theme. It's like this really somber kind of brass section. It kicks in at the end of the main theme in the title sequence. It's just amazing. I love that they did keep those themes going, even when we did get Christopher Young doing the soundtrack for Spider-Man 3. For me, my favorite soundtrack out of all the 3 films is from Spider-Man 3. I think that Christopher Young really just took those themes and really just absolutely nailed it. The Sandman theme and the Venom theme and everything like that. But it all started from here. And, Elfman probably is one of my favorite composers. I think it's been a while since he's hit his stride to the caliber of the stuff he was putting out, certainly in the 80s and the 90s with Tim Burton, and even to this point. But this is without doubt one of the best superhero soundtracks out there with the best themes. You've got the Green Goblin theme, you've got all the assortment of themes for Spider-Man in every walk of his life, from the romantic side to the kind of nerdy side, and then obviously the heroic side when he becomes Spider-Man. It's just such a full, rich score, and I think it's definitely up there for me. In alongside Superman the movie with John Williams, with Batman '89, Danny Elfman, and then again, as I said, 2 for 2 with this one.
I think this is arguably the best superhero score ever done, and that's coming off a Zimmer fanboy. I wouldn't say that lightly. And it's the moment the Columbia logo appears.
Yeah,
there's no let's have an intro for Sony, let's have an intro for these. The song start, and I almost feel as if the opening few notes have been designed around that Columbia logo, because it does feel like a light going on, like what the statue's holding. But
what I'd say about that logo really quickly, I think a film's special when every time you see that logo in any other film by that company, you always think of that one. 20th Century Fox, always think of Star Wars. New Line Cinema with the ladders kind of flipping, I always think of Lord of the Rings. Columbia, every single time, it's always Spider-Man 1 for me.
Yeah, MGM Bond, and that kind of, and I think when you get synonymous with an identity, it's a part of it, and I think the music helps that. And it's just, aside from that, the fact we get an opening credits as well is not so common. Still, that's something that's gone out the window, which is understandable at the time, but it works, and it doesn't end with the Spider-Man logo, but it's right at the beginning of it, and it's a really amazing way to bring you into it. That not that you care, but you're getting webs and all this stuff. As a 6-year-old, it's great. As a 25-year-old, it's great. And as you kind of said, from where it starts, there's identifiable themes within these characters, and I think when you get Uncle Ben's death, you get great moments. Then you get his kind of anger, and it's the way Danny Elfman alters the score for the film. And one of my all-time favorite villain themes ever is the Green Goblin. Really weirdly used on the bridge, though, because they really only use it when MJ wakes up. But the amount of times I've driven home and had that activated to the correct part, so when I pull up on the drive, it kicks off the score, and it's the really sad things that I really enjoy. But I don't think this film, I mean, the film obviously works anyway, but I think for when we discussed about the best films ever made, I'm not saying this is one of them, but so many of them have a great score. And I always think that you have to have both of them combined. You need the film to match the score. You need the score to match the film. It's a really dumb, simple thing to say, but it elevates the storytelling. And I think Danny Elfman does this so well. There's not, bar the credits, there's no like external music. There's no bands. There's no things like that. Bar the guitarist on the subway and stuff. It's a phenomenal soundtrack. And I think it is so intertwined with the character. It's been hard for anyone else to do it. Now, The Amazing Spider-Man had 2 different composers. And even as a Zimmer fan, I wasn't a massive fan of it. And that's because there's always been one definitive Spider-Man theme for me. And even the Holland one, I will give Michael Giacchino the credit that Michael Giacchino, I think, has been able to make a recognizable Spider-Man score by itself. He's made great villain scores in his 2 films as well. And I think he's the closest the franchise has had to Danny Elfman since. What I'm hoping for, if Tobey Maguire is in this new film, I'm glad that Giacchino is the composer, because he is not the arrogant type that would record over, I guess this is an Elfman criticism, right? When by the time he got to the Justice League, when he used the 89 Batman theme on a different Batman, Giacchino is going to play the Maguire Spider-Man theme when he enters. He will be able to blend all 3. Maybe he'll even play a bit of the Zimmer one if Garfield's in it too. But I think it's one of them where if he came back, if that score wasn't working, the moment's killed. You have to have the music, and that's because Danny Elfman made the music synonymous with the character.
Well, I think with Giacchino, didn't he just use the classic TV Spider-Man theme and reorchestrated it? Isn't that like Spider-Man's main theme in the new ones, or is there another one I'm forgetting?
No, he did it as an intro for one of the films, but then he's dropped it. He's got his own like hero theme now.
Because it kicked in the trailer again, and I didn't know if that was something that I couldn't remember the music in all honesty from the 3 films, so I didn't know if that was like Spider-Man's theme across all of them.
It's nearer to the old theme, but it's not like I think on his one they taped over the MCU theme with the classic Spider-Man 60s one,
right?
But he's kind of made his own. It's similar-ish, but it's not alike, if that makes sense.
And I mean, with this coming out in 2002, this superhero film wouldn't be complete with a very of its time rock soundtrack as well, rock and R&B soundtrack. So of course you've got Macy Gray's My Nutty what is it, my Nutmeg Fantasy, I think it's called, during the parade scene. Immediately dates this film, but I always laugh every single time she comes on there. And as I mentioned, Hero by Chad Kroeger and Josie Scott, I think it is, in the end credits. Love that song, so of its time. And I'm looking at all those other films that came out around then as well. Now, I've never seen Blade, but I imagine that's probably got a similar soundtrack. I know that Daredevil certainly has, the Ben Affleck Daredevil film. And a lot of those films, those superhero films, probably Fantastic Four as well, all had that kind of, those early 2000s kind of grungy rock kind of sounds. I actually can't remember if Spider-Man 2 or 3 do. I think that's just score music throughout the credits, if I remember rightly. I think it might just be this one.
I'm not too sure with the full credits.
Well, I guess we'll find out next week, won't we, once we get to it. But yeah, I think this is the only one that sticks out of me of having that very of its time quality to the soundtrack, not to the score itself, but definitely the soundtrack. And I guess that was a question I was going to ask you before we move on to like favorite scenes. Watching this again recently, do you think it is massively dated in any way? Do you think this could stand up to any films that come out now, or do you think there are elements to it that do kind of date it to that particular date?
Sorry, the score of the whole film.
Just the whole film now, sorry, just in general.
I'm going to go out on a whim and say absolutely not. This is, the primary thing with these films, and not to sort of shit on younger people and whatnot. There's obviously more to films than CGI. Yes, beautiful CGI is great. It can age badly. And I'm not going to talk about quality CGI because this is a new technology at the time. This is still in the early days of it. So much of it shot practically. If your beef with a film is going to be the a few visuals, then you're not looking into the storytelling, the character, the drama, the character development, character progression, all that kind of stuff that makes a film work. And as simple as this is an origin film. This needs to tell the story of Peter Parker getting bit by a radioactive spider that turns him into the character Spider-Man. And it's able to do that in a 2-hour runtime. It's not trying to set up and expand too much. You have a very simple villain, but the quality of the film comes down to its storytelling. And I think that is something that has made it a timeless classic. And I think there's a reason why, when we can look back with nostalgia and whatnot, every version since has completely 180'd it. Let's say it was like Batman, right? Let's say this opened like Batman 89, where we got Spider-Man 2 first, if that makes any form of sense. Mm-hmm. And then by the time you get 3 Spider-Mans down the line with Tom Holland, then you get a Spider-Man origin for the first ever time. That will no doubt be fantastic because it's the first ever time you're getting the origin of the character. But when you've nailed the origin of the character 15 years ago, you have to do all you can to avoid copying it when it's done so well. Mm-hmm. If it was done terribly, no one would talk about it. And I think this is where I'm trying to take off the bias, but I'm not going to. This film is fundamentally, to me, one of the best comic book films ever made. As far as the term blockbuster goes, this is right up there with blockbuster films as well. I think this film has aged beautifully. And again, not to jump on seeing it in 4K recently, but by them showing practically, that is aging the film better. By the time I get to Amazing Spider-Man in a few weeks, I'm very curious to see how that looks, because there's a very CGI heavy film. There are a lot of things involved. Has that held up today? Effects are better in 2012 than 2002. But I can tell you one thing for sure, the storytelling isn't tight. The characters are not that well developed, bar Gwen and Peter together. And I think that's the best where the fundamentals lie of this film. Take nostalgia away, you still have a fantastic film. Add in nostalgia, you have an even better fantastic film. So yes, I'm biased, but I hope that's made some form of sense, because I think where we are in 2021, what we had, we've had Eternals, Shang-Chi, fantastic. I would say that's got character. You messaged me earlier about comic book films today, and it did me think Shang-Chi had an origin, you had character development, you had the father-son dynamic, you had a whole relationship built of family. And I think that's why that film works so well. And stuff like Eternals, where there's no character development at all. Mm-hmm. And you have films like Black Widow, where there is pretty much no character development because it's a necessary film. And you get a couple of scenes of other people. And we're getting like 7-8 films a year now. But the model is always the same. And this was the very first model to have done for these films. But again, it set a standard that, to me personally, is yet to be superseded by any Marvel film. Batman Begins gives it its run for its money. Couldn't have 2 completely different films together. But is there a better origin film for any of these comic book characters of the last 20 years? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. we are really spoilt now, aren't we, with superhero films?
That's the
And
best kind
obviously
of spoiled.
studios just go with where the money's at, and superhero films are making bank at the moment. Well, Eternals isn't. They are making bank, and the audience is still there, and that's why we're getting upteen different Disney Plus shows, all these different side stories and what ifs and whatnots and everything. And it's crazy. And this film, every time I go back to this film, it does remind you of that simpler time where you might only get one comic book film a year, maybe two. And this was still very much in the infancy. And yes, we'd had comic book films before this point, but we hadn't seen anything like this one. And this absolutely set the stage for everything that was to come as well. I think films feel very differently now, especially comic book ones. And I'd say definitely more sort of like modern Marvel films, not to rag on Marvel or anything. There are still, occasionally the films that come out that I very much enjoy. But they are very effects heavy, and they don't feel like they have the same heart to it, I guess, in the script or that character building. It feels very flashy and showy, and
there's no passion from the filmmakers.
No, and obviously these films have jokes as well, and the Marvel films have jokes, but they can get in the way of some of the drama. You'd never have a scene now, I don't think, in any of these Spider-Man films. I mean, I hope I'm wrong with No Way Home, but the final fight in this film, in that kind of graveyard, or where is it, that ruin with the bricks and the blood, and how visceral and brutal it feels in that final moment, you'd never get a scene like that. Even the stuff with like Uncle Ben, it's very rare that you'd get a scene like that now, of like genuine pathos and like genuine emotion to it, because it always feels like it's a race to the next action scene. And that's what it feels like with the new Spider-Man films. I hope the new film has more scenes where it just lets characters to breathe. But if anything, I think that this new upcoming one won't have time to do that, because there is so much that it's got to pack into what I'm assuming is going to be like a 2.5-hour runtime at least. It's got to bring all the old, well, we hope all the old Spider-Mans back in, and the villains, and continue the Holland stuff, and bring in all his characters, and have incredible action along the way. I don't think the film physically has enough room for any kind of character development or significant character development. Then again, I said the same before going into Infinity War, and that definitely does has its spectacle, but it also has its moment of character development, and that's an even bigger ensemble cast. So
that only really develops one character, which is Thanos.
Yeah.
But it's and that's the thing. Like, it's what we speak about now, where because there's a corporate machine in there, and yes, we like the films and people watch them. There is it's like what's happened in recent news. We can't delay one film. I'm sorry, we have to now delay our entire scheduled calendar, because they need to be articulated, released in these orders. And when you get things like that, it can be tough to follow. And again, this is why I'm going to go back to Shang-Chi. Is a beautiful example. I thought it had a terrible marketing campaign. And for me, that's the top tier of MCU as far as I'm concerned. Every viewing solidified it. The action was great. You could see it was shot in action, had character development. And that is a film where you can tell there is a filmmaker that has wanted to make that film. And I'm not going to be unfair and say no one cares about the Marvel films they make. 90% of them are them saying, okay, we're doing this film, now we need to find the guy to do it. Versus somebody going to Marvel saying, hey, I really want to do this film and this is why. And I'll tell you what, the only thing that comes to mind, and I'll be proven wrong, I'm sure many of them have, is Mahershala Ali going to Kevin Feige and saying, I want to play Blade, make that happen. And that is the sign from the get-go. There is somebody there that cares about it. And it's even going back to Spider-Verse with Sony. Mark Webb, whether he got hired for putting his name, I'll never know. But he was a corporate machine. Yes, he liked the character, but he was just a part of a corporate ensemble. You're going to do this film the way we tell you to do it. You're just going to do it. Whereas when you get Phil Miller and Chris Lord doing the animated Spider-Man film Spider-Verse, you can tell how much care and affection they have for those characters, for who they're writing, the specific Spider-Man they picked to be there, the morals of the story. There's so much going on there. And wherever this launches, I just yearn for the comic book films where people are brought in not by commission but by decree. And
well, hopefully we'll get that next year with Matt Reeves' Batman trilogy, going back to a simpler time, a trilogy again, a director
he wants to tell his story.
He gets the character, wants to tell his story, and it's going to be, well, we hope, completely devoid of any links to universes or shared universes, whatnot. It's just going to be a self-contained story, self-contained trilogy. And I'm kind of clamoring for that a little bit now, in all honesty. In this world we live in where everything's connected, it's great that we do have that, and we've got an MCU that's been built and continuing to build over all these years. But watching this again, it just made me yearn for those simpler times where I could just go and see an X-Men film, a Spider-Man film, or whatever it happened to be, and not have to worry or concern myself that I haven't seen the Hawkeye Christmas Disney Plus TV show before I go and see the next film. You know what I mean? So there is that, but and I don't even think we had this discussion much in our last review that we did, but it just shows you how much changes even in a few years, with Marvel, how it goes, from strength to strength and just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And how it's kind of nostalgic. Well, it is nostalgic, as we mentioned, almost coming up to 20 years to go back to this film. And I think it'll be an interesting comparison piece as well with the new Spider-Man film coming out, if we do get Maguire and Garfield in it, to go back to this and see how they continued it. But obviously we'll get to that review in December sometime. I guess we can sort of, that did feel like a final thoughts, I guess, a little bit. But if we cycle back to like any favorite scenes that, I think if we mentioned them all, I mean, for me, it's probably like all of the bugle scenes, definitely. But if I'm going for sort of like more emotional, character driven scenes, the reaction shot, as you mentioned, after Uncle Ben's death, just that whole moment, him sat on top of the rooftop and he's crying, and then it cuts to him returning home. Great moment. The upside down kiss is just iconic. I'm a sucker for those kind of like romantic moments in superhero films or superhero related things. But for me, if I was going to take one, it's the final graveyard scene straight into the Spider-Man hype of that swing away.
Yeah, I think that's a defining scene that if you were to slap, if you do a 2-minute trailer for somebody who's never seen a Spider-Man film, you can show them that clip and the segue and the final shot, and you're done. That's all they need to ever see about the film. I love.
You mentioned the montage earlier. I don't know if we mentioned that when we were live or before it.
I can't remember.
Just all the different colourful characters that we've got. There's Lucy Lawless in there. There's the Workers of New York, which I mean, we didn't mention that during the final fight scene where they're picking. You messed with one of us.
He comes back. The guy with the dreadlocks comes back in Spider-Man 2. I'm telling you, I always recognize.
Is it the guy with the? No, it's not. No, it's not the guy with the pizza. I'm forgetting. Where does he come back in it?
I can't remember what scene, but he is in Spider-Man 2.
I'll be looking out for him now.
But yeah, the dreadlock guy. Is it one of the fire? It might be the fire scene of the little girl. I might be wrong, but I'm gonna keep an eye out.
Yeah, I'll look out.
I loved the final showdown because at the age of 6 years old, and not that you're seeing something violent or brutal, you are seeing what Spider-Man's had to go through. And that's a really weird thing to say. Like, how many times we laugh at nowadays where there's like a little bit of blood on them in the corner of their eye at the end? Mm-hmm. I think we laughed at Ghostbusters, right? Bill Murray's got the least marshmallow because he clearly doesn't want on, which is fine. And when you get to this film, you've got the bomb going off in his face. You've got the mask ripping off to pieces. It's the meme, isn't it? Again, you want more pop culture of this film? They always joke like, is it like lads on Christmas Day? And it's like his face all ripped off of the boxes and stuff like that. And you've seen him go through the ringer. You've seen him, which you think face death. Not saying Anne Partridge, but as a 6-year-old, you think Spider-Man's going to die. Green Goblin stomps on his hand, and you've spun your last web, Spider-Man. That's a great line in itself, by the way. But it is just like the moment in which like Green Goblin sort of says how like him and MJ's going to have one hell of a time. The weapon goes into a tri-weapon. I'm not sure why. There's electricity flowing, and it's the soundtrack kicking, and it's the hero moment, isn't it? And he fucking yeets a whole brick wall onto the Green Goblin. Like, that's not spoken about enough. And it's just, again, we haven't had, I don't even care that it's fight scenes like that. That's actors fighting, stunts, people doing stunts. It looks real, it's brutal, versus CGI ship, CGI this, CGI that. And it's a shame. And even when you get to Spider-Man 2 in the final climax, even that to a point, yes, there's CGI arms. It's very dramatic, the actual ending of it. It's not like another big CGI shoot 'em up. I know we get a bit more of that in the third film, but for me, there's so many great scenes, and I'm gonna also add another Goblin that I always loved the praise as a kid, and I think it's the music that kicks out my fascination as a kid of the Green Goblin. It's just like, yeah, that whole 5-minute sequence was amazing. To be fair, I can't pick a favorite scene. I just give you the inside film. I don't think there is a bad scene in this film.
I'm really struggling to think of one, because even ones that are a little bit more corny than other scenes, I still like them because I appreciate that the film goes those places as well. Yeah, no, I don't think I can think of a bad scene in this film too. Which I guess takes us on to final thoughts. This is just absolutely outstanding. If you were to carve a Mount Rushmore of greatest comic book films of all time, this would absolutely be on there without a shadow of a doubt. Now, I know last time we did these reviews and we went through the trilogy, I think we both ended up saying that we liked Spider-Man 1 more than we did 2. Now, when I was growing up, I always went to 2 more, and I don't know if it because it had the most action. It could be the video game tie-in, as I mentioned in the intro. But yeah, I'll be interested to see next week if I still prefer this one. I think I probably will, because I think it's just an absolutely fantastic origin story. It's a director that clearly has a passion for the character, got to make the film he wanted to make with his own unique stamp on there. There are some corny scenes in there. There are some clunky bits of dialogue. You've got, "It's you who's out, Gobby, out of your mind." Or there are lines in this film where Green Goblin picks up J. Jonah Jameson by the throat and goes, "Jameson, you slime." Like, those lines are in this film, and it's great. It's a film that knows exactly what it is. It's a comic book. It does those fun comic booky moments.
The screaming woman.
Yes, what's going on with the screaming woman? I'll never know to this day what goes on with that scene, but it hits all the beats that a great origin story needs to do, a great superhero film needs to do. It might be taking inspiration from the likes of Superman the movie, but it does its absolute, its own thing with it. Flawless cast, perfectly realized from the comic book. What more could you want? It's a film that juggles so much, and in a very short runtime of 2 hours, almost bang on the dot, it absolutely nails it. I love revisiting this film, and I was hoping it was going to hold up, even though it's been 4 years or whatever since we last did it, and it absolutely still does. Yeah, that's my review on Spider-Man. Looking forward to the next 2 as well.
Absolutely, it's hard to sum up when it's been around for so long. It's had such a tremendous impact, not on yourself growing up or being a fan, but you can see the impact this film had on an entire industry. And where we go to now, 19 years later, again, we're getting 6-8 films a year. Yes, we had Superman. Yes, we had Batman before. And I know that people say Blade is important, all this. It is to a point. X-Men to a point, Spider-Man was the one when it clicked. These films aren't just going to make money. These are big blockbusters, May release dates, and you can have a great film. Dark Knight is the one they deemed you can have an Academy Award winning film in a comic book film. Because I think Spider-Man was the first time, probably since Batman 89 and maybe the other Superman films, say you can have a genuine, fantastic film tucked up inside of a comic book creation. And for it to be probably, I think I'm in the same path with you, the top 2 superheroes across all forms of the media, to get it done right on the first time of asking, the patience they've shown and not just shoehorning in a release beforehand, I think that's where the credit lies to, and full credit to Sam Raimi for this. I think we'll talk more in Spider-Man 2, but this is my favorite film, but not the best of the 3. And I don't know if any other people have that kind of thought, but I'm very curious to see what they think, because it's hard to wrap up a final thoughts when we've just given it one just for 2 hours already.
Yeah, I've loved it. This has been one of my favorite reviews that we've done. I probably said the same when we did it the first time as well, but I think that's a good segue as any to pass over to everyone else watching this as well. If you made it for the full almost 2 hours, 10 minutes now, let us know your thoughts on Spider-Man as well. Is this a film that has a particular personal connection to you? Do you love it? Is it your favorite one of the trilogy? We're basically just going in all guns blazing with Spider-Man hype at the moment, leading into the new film. So on anything that we've discussed, do you have a favorite iteration, either a favorite film in this trilogy or a subsequent Spider-Man? Do let us know, and be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe as we continue on week to week with these Spider-Man reviews. And of course, we'll be back next Wednesday with Spider-Man 2 from 2004. Obviously, we've kind of given away a little bit already that we'll have absolutely sterling things to say on that film as well. That will be coming Wednesday, the 24th of November, as we edge ever closer to December and almost Christmas, and a new Spider-Man film as well. So let's hope it's a Christmas gift worth having. And yeah, we've got so much other stuff coming up on the channel as well at this point, almost daily content. So among Spider-Man reviews, which obviously we're going to be continuing for the next few weeks, what else do we have coming up on the channel, George?
So we'll save the big one till the end, but there's a new Ghostbusters film out tomorrow in the UK by the time this video goes up. We're going to have a review of this Monday, the 22nd of November. We've been reviewing Ghostbusters 1, Ghostbusters 2 each Monday. They're both now up on the channel. So if you're a fan of Ghostbusters, if you're curious about the new film, we will have a review on that. They've been fun to do as somebody that's an outsider of the franchise. And they're not the only comedy films on the channel at the moment. Yesterday, our video for Austin Powers, The Spy Shag Me would have been up on the channel. And of course, we're going to round off those next Tuesday with the Spy. It's not the Spy of Me. With Goldmember. We said Goldfinger as well. Because we've done all the Bond films. We're in the Austin Powers mode. We're on the come down. We're going to the parodies, the comedies. So one more Austin Powers film, followed by Johnny English. That'll wrap up probably the Spy stuff for the rest of this year. So we do have another retrospective starting at some point we need to talk about. But there is something big happening in December aside from a new Spider-Man film. And Chris, you and Tate are building up to that with another review on a Peter Jackson film.
Yep, so coming tomorrow is going to be the Heavenly Creatures review. That's going to be at 10 p.m. GMT. So every Thursday we have, well, I mean, the retrospective is probably going to go into the next year as well. You know, we'll have King Kong and the Lovely Bones in the month of January. But we've got two before, well, including Heavenly Creatures. We've got another one following that before we take on the big month, which is going to be Lord of the Rings month on the channel in December, along many other things as well. We've got another trilogy of reviews coming out. We've got, you know, continuing with the Spider-Man reviews. So it's going to be a very packed month for us, but obviously we'll be talking about Lord of the Rings. And this is Peter Jackson's first drama film that he did. You know, he's done a lot of sort of like oddball, wacky, puppet-filled films and violent, gory zombie films before this point. So I'm very much looking forward to talking about Heavenly Creatures, and we kind of see him dip into the world of that more autobiographical drama realm. So yeah, that's going to be 10 p.m. tomorrow, and we're going to be continuing that every Thursday.
Definitely. So, guys, as you said, there's a lot of stuff happening on the channel right now. The best way to find us is getting to our social medias, Twitter at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy. These are all older films we're speaking about. There are new films coming out. We'll have reviews of as and when they come and go. Of course, Spider-Man's a big one in December. We've got a lot of other things happening. We mentioned Ghostbusters Afterlife, but you know, the cinemas are back open. Films are making money, good money, and it's nice to be back at them. Presumably people aren't horrible next to you. So do join us if you do like your new releases. There's other things planned. We'll have more announcements next year. And of course, if you're a big fan of the Raimi trilogy, it's the 20th anniversary next year. So we will be doing stuff, which we will, of course, announce.
Got something in the pipeline.
Yeah, but there's something we all want to kind of do. So make of that what you will. But, you know, the Raimi stuff's not going away anytime soon. Because there's bloody Doctor Strange as well. That's made me think. I think it's coming out the week of the anniversary now.
Oh, is it?
That's nice. The announce date changes. So, yeah. So for you Spider fans, thank you all for watching. It's been amazing, as you said, Chris, to go back to this. It's been longer than the film, but the scary thing is we could have spoke about this for even longer.
Yeah.
Which is what terrifies me. So once more, thank you all for watching, and we'll be sure to see you on the next one.
See ya.